Forget rented Lambos and a fake Rolex for the gram. We're talking real billion-dollar empires, gated mansions, private security, and shell companies stacked across multiple countries, all built and protected by women. Fam. Today, we're going inside the billionaire lifestyle of the most dangerous female narcos on the planet. The wives and daughters who ran point behind some of the biggest cartel names in the game, while the world stayed focused on the men. Y'all think it's just the kingpins pulling the strings? Nah, behind every empire like Chung and Sinaloa, you got women holding it down on the business side, moving money, running front companies, keeping the whole operation breathing even when the feds are closing in. We're talking about women like Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, wife of Ching boss El Mencho, who allegedly controlled over 70 businesses and the cartel's entire money laundering operation, while he handled the violence and the territory. And it's not just the wives, gang, we're talking daughters too. Women raised inside these empires from birth, groomed since they were kids to run the family business no matter what happens to the men at the top. Some of them end up living the exact lifestyle their fathers built. Mansions, designer everything, private jets, until the day it all comes crashing down. According to federal reporting, some of these women have controlled finances, fronted businesses, and kept entire cartel structures alive long after the so-called bosses got locked up or killed. So before y'all assume this is just a story about men with guns and money, understand, this is about the women who never got the headlines but ran just as much of the empire. No cap. We're covering several of them today, so make sure you stick around to the end, because some of these stories get a lot more disturbing than where we're starting. Let's get into it, starting with the woman they called La Jefa, the boss herself, starting things off with Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, because before El Mencho was even a name people feared, she was already in the business.
She was born into a world where avocados and opium poppies grew side by side, where family loyalty meant everything, and where money flowed like rivers through the mountains of Michoacan. At first glance, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia seemed destined for a quiet, rural life among her 17 siblings. But destiny had other plans. When she married Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes in 1996, she wasn't just becoming the wife of a man who would later become Mexico's most wanted drug lord. She was uniting two criminal dynasties that would reshape the global narcotics trade forever. This wasn't a love story. This was a merger of empires. Meet Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, known in the underworld as La Jefa, the boss, the financial mastermind behind the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The woman who turned dirty money into legitimate billions. Every cartel boss's dream woman, beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless when it came to business. But here's what makes her story truly extraordinary. She didn't marry into the narco world. She was born into it. Her family didn't just grow drugs. They invented the blueprint that would become the CJNG. And when she joined forces with El Mencho, they created something the world had never seen before. A cartel that operated like a Fortune 500 company. Today, we step inside the hidden world of Mexico's most powerful narco queen. This is the story of how a farm girl from Michoacan became the financial architect of a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire. This is the story of La Jefa. To understand Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, you have to understand where she came from. Born in the rugged mountains of rural Michoacan in the 1970s, she entered a world where the line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise had been blurred for generations. Michoacan wasn't just any Mexican state. It was the birthplace of Mexico's modern drug trade. The fertile volcanic soil that made it perfect for growing avocados also made it ideal for cultivating marijuana and opium poppies. For families like the Gonzalez Valencias, this wasn't a choice between legal and illegal crops. It was about survival and opportunity. Rosalinda was the eldest daughter among 18 siblings. Yes, 18. In a family that size, everyone had a role to play. And from an early age, Rosalinda showed she had the intelligence and leadership qualities that would set her apart. While her brothers learned the physical aspects of the trade, cultivation, transportation, and protection, Rosalinda absorbed the business side. She watched how money moved, how deals were structured, and how legitimate businesses could be used to hide illegal profits. The Gonzalez Valencia family wasn't just another group of farmers turned drug dealers. They were visionaries. In the 1970s, when most Mexican drug operations were small-scale and disorganized, the González Valencias were already thinking bigger. They understood that the real money wasn't just in growing drugs. It was in controlling the entire supply chain from production to distribution. This forward-thinking approach led them to form what would become known as the Milenio Cartel in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Unlike other criminal groups that relied purely on violence and intimidation, the Milenio Cartel operated more like a corporation. They invested in infrastructure, developed sophisticated smuggling routes, and most importantly, they understood the power of money laundering. But the González Valencia family's true genius lay in their ability to separate their violent operations from their financial operations. While the Milenio Cartel handled the drugs, guns, and territorial disputes, the family created a parallel organization focused purely on money, Los Queenies. Los Queenies, led by Rosalinda's brother Abigail González Valencia, known as El Queenie, became the financial backbone of the family's operations. They weren't just washing drug money. They were building a legitimate business empire that could generate profits independent of drug sales, real estate, agriculture, tourism, healthcare. Los Queenies had their fingers in every profitable sector of the Mexican economy. This is where Rosalinda truly learned her craft. While other cartel wives were relegated to spending money on luxury goods and staying out of business affairs, Rosalinda was being groomed as a financial strategist. She understood corporate structures, international banking, and most importantly, how to make dirty money look clean. By the time she reached her 20s, Rosalinda González Valencia wasn't just the daughter of a drug trafficking family. She was a key player in one of Mexico's most sophisticated criminal financial networks. She had the education, the connections, and the ruthless business acumen that would make her invaluable to any criminal organization. But she was about to meet someone who would change everything. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man who would become El Mencho, wasn't born into the drug trade like Rosalinda. He was a farm worker, a man who understood hard labor and the value of loyalty. But he was also ambitious, intelligent, and absolutely fearless when it came to violence. El Mencho first encountered the González Valencia family in the 1980s when he was hired as a guard for their marijuana plantations. This wasn't unusual. The family employed hundreds of workers across their various operations, but El Mencho stood out. He was reliable, he was smart, and most importantly, he understood that success in this business required both brains and brutality. As El Mencho proved his worth to the González Valencia clan, he was gradually brought deeper into their operations. He learned their methods, their roots, and their philosophy of business. But more than that, he caught the attention of Rosalinda. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared ambition rather than simple romance. Rosalinda saw in El Mencho someone who could provide the muscle and street credibility that her family's financial operations needed. El Mencho saw in Rosalinda someone who could teach him how to turn violence into sustainable wealth. In the early 1990s, El Mencho made his first serious attempt to expand into the United States market. Like many ambitious Mexican traffickers, he saw America as the ultimate prize, a country with an insatiable appetite for drugs and the money to pay premium prices. But his first ventures into the U.S. market ended in disaster. El Mencho was arrested twice in the United States on drug charges during his 20s. Both times he was convicted and deported back to Mexico. For many criminals, this would have been the end of their American dreams. But El Mencho was different. Each arrest taught him valuable lessons about American law enforcement, about the weaknesses in existing smuggling operations, and about the importance of having sophisticated financial backing. When El Mencho returned to Mexico after his second deportation, he made a decision that would change the course of Mexican organized crime forever. Instead of trying to rebuild his operations from scratch, he would align himself permanently with the González Valencia family. And the best way to cement that alliance was through marriage. On a quiet day in 1996, in a ceremony that was deliberately kept low-key, Rosalinda González Valencia married Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. To outsiders, it might have looked like a simple wedding between two people from the same rural community. But those who understood the dynamics of Mexico's drug trade knew they were witnessing something historic. As El País newspaper would later describe it, this marriage brought together the power of two worlds, that of bazookas and that of dollars. El Mencho brought the violence and muscle, the ability to eliminate competitors, control territory, and command respect through fear. Rosalinda brought the money and financial infrastructure, the ability to turn criminal profits into legitimate wealth and sustainable power. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a merger, and like any successful merger, it combined the strengths of both parties while covering their weaknesses. El Mencho had proven he could move drugs and eliminate enemies, but his previous attempts at building a lasting organization had failed because he lacked the financial sophistication to sustain growth. Rosalinda had access to one of Mexico's most advanced money laundering networks, but Los Quinas needed the kind of territorial control and enforcement capability that only someone like El Mencho could provide. The timing of their marriage was also crucial. By 1996, Mexico's drug trade was undergoing a massive transformation. The old guard cartels, the Guadalajara cartel, the Gulf cartel, and the early versions of what would become the Sinaloa cartel were either fragmenting due to internal conflicts or struggling to adapt to increased law enforcement pressure from both Mexican and American authorities. This created an opportunity for a new kind of criminal organization, one that could combine the territorial control and violence of traditional cartels with the financial sophistication and legitimate business integration that the González Valencia family had perfected. El Mencho and Rosalinda weren't just getting married. They were positioning themselves to fill a power vacuum that was about to reshape the entire Mexican underworld. The early years of their marriage coincided with El Mencho's rise through the ranks of the Milenio cartel, but both he and Rosalinda understood that their ultimate goal wasn't to serve someone else's organization. It was to build their own empire. The opportunity came in the mid-2000s when the Milenio cartel began to fragment due to arrests of key leaders and internal power struggles. Rather than fight for control of the existing organization, El Mencho made a strategic decision. He would create something entirely new. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG, was officially born around 2010, but its foundations had been laid years earlier through the marriage of El Mencho and Rosalinda. From the very beginning, the CJNG was designed to be different from other cartels. Traditional cartels were essentially armed gangs that happened to traffic drugs. They were hierarchical, territorial, and relied primarily on violence to maintain control. The CJNG, by contrast, was designed from the ground up to be a hybrid organization, part criminal gang, part multinational corporation. This is where Rosalinda's influence became crucial. While El Mencho focused on recruitment, territorial expansion, and the violent aspects of cartel operations, Rosalinda was building the financial infrastructure that would make the CJNG sustainable and scalable. She didn't just launder money, she created an entire parallel economy. Using the lessons she had learned from her family's Los Quinas organization, Rosalinda began establishing legitimate businesses that could serve multiple purposes. They could launder drug profits, they could provide cover for criminal operations, and most importantly, they could generate legitimate income that would make the organization less dependent on drug trafficking alone. By 2015, Mexican authorities estimated that Rosalinda González Valencia controlled a network of over 70 businesses affiliated with the CJNG. These weren't just front companies designed to hide criminal activity. They were profitable enterprises that generated real value while serving the cartel's needs. The scope of her business empire was staggering. She had investments in healthcare companies that could provide medical services to cartel members and their families. She owned tourism and hospitality businesses that could move money across borders and provide meeting places for criminal associates. She controlled retail operations that could distribute products and provide employment for cartel supporters. Her agricultural companies weren't just growing legal crops, they were developing the infrastructure and expertise that could be quickly converted to drug cultivation if needed. Her consulting firms provided legitimate business advice while also serving as intelligence-gathering operations. Her advertising companies could influence public opinion and provide cover for communications between cartel members. But perhaps most impressively, Rosalinda had moved into international trade. Through a network of import-export companies, she was able to move money and goods across borders in ways that were virtually impossible for law enforcement to track. She understood that the future of organized crime wasn't just about controlling territory in Mexico. It was about building global networks that could operate in multiple countries simultaneously. According to Mexican authorities, between 2015 and 2016 alone, Rosalinda was responsible for laundering over 1 billion Mexican pesos, approximately 50 million US dollars. But this figure likely represents only a fraction of her actual financial operations, as it only includes the transactions that authorities were able to identify and track. What made Rosalinda truly dangerous wasn't just the amount of money she was moving. It was how sophisticated her operations had become. She wasn't just washing drug money through simple cash-intensive businesses like restaurants and car washes. She was creating complex financial instruments, international investment vehicles, and legitimate business partnerships that could generate profits and provide cover for criminal operations simultaneously. The U.S. Treasury Department eventually identified specific businesses that were part of her network: a sushi restaurant chain with locations in Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, a premium tequila company based in Guadalajara, a luxury rental cabin business in the mountain resort town of Tapalpa, an advertising firm, and multiple agricultural companies. Each of these businesses served multiple purposes. The restaurants could launder cash while providing meeting places for cartel associates. The tequila company could export products to the United States while potentially smuggling drugs or money. The rental cabins could house cartel members or serve as safe houses for criminal operations. The advertising firm could influence public opinion while gathering intelligence on competitors and law enforcement. This wasn't just money laundering. This was the creation of a legitimate business empire that happened to be funded by criminal profits. And at the center of it all was Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the woman who had transformed from a farm girl from Michoacan into one of the most sophisticated financial criminals in the world. By 2018, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia had become too successful for her own good. Her financial network had grown so large and sophisticated that it was impossible to hide from international law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Treasury Department had been tracking her operations for years, and Mexican authorities were under increasing pressure to take action against the CJNG's financial infrastructure. On May 26, 2018, Rosalinda's carefully constructed world came crashing down. She was arrested by the Mexican Navy outside a 7-Eleven convenience store in Zapopan, Jalisco, a mundane location for such a significant moment in the history of organized crime. The arrest wasn't random. Mexican authorities had been conducting surveillance on Rosalinda for months, tracking her movements and building a case against her money laundering operations. They chose to move when they did because they had gathered enough evidence to charge her with financial crimes while avoiding the more complex task of proving her direct involvement in drug trafficking. The charges against Rosalinda focused on money laundering, specifically her failure to properly report financial transactions and her use of legitimate businesses to hide criminal profits. But everyone involved understood that this was just the beginning. The real goal was to dismantle the financial infrastructure that made the CJNG possible. For 3 months, Rosalinda remained in custody while her lawyers fought the charges. This period was crucial for both her and the CJNG. Without her direct oversight, the cartel's financial operations became less efficient and more vulnerable to law enforcement detection. Several of her businesses were forced to shut down or scale back operations, and the flow of laundered money slowed significantly. But Rosalinda had built her network well. Even from prison, she was able to maintain some control over her operations through trusted associates and family members. And her lawyers, some of the best money could buy, were working around the clock to secure her release. In August 2018, after paying 1.5 million Mexican pesos, approximately 78,000 US dollars, in bail, Rosalinda was released from prison. Officially, she was free pending trial. Unofficially, everyone knew this was just a temporary reprieve. Rosalinda's freedom lasted just over 3 years. During this time, she attempted to rebuild her financial network while staying below the radar of law enforcement. But she made a critical mistake. She couldn't stay away from her family. On November 15, 2021, Rosalinda arrived at a courthouse in Zapopan for a hearing related to her son Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, who was facing his own legal troubles. It was a moment of maternal instinct that would cost her everything. Mexican authorities had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. They knew that despite all her sophistication and caution, Rosalinda would eventually expose herself to support her family. When she arrived at the courthouse, she was immediately arrested by federal agents. This second arrest was different from the first. By 2021, authorities had spent years building a more comprehensive case against Rosalinda. They had tracked additional financial transactions, identified more businesses in her network, and gathered evidence of her ongoing involvement in money laundering operations, even after her first arrest. The timing was also significant. The arrest came at a moment when the CJNG was facing increased pressure from both Mexican and American law enforcement. El Mencho himself had become one of the most wanted men in the world, with a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. By targeting Rosalinda, authorities were striking at the financial heart of the organization. Mexican officials described her arrest as a significant blow to the financial structure of organized crime in the state of Jalisco. This wasn't just rhetoric. Without Rosalinda's direct oversight, the CJNG's money laundering operations became significantly less efficient and more vulnerable to detection. In December 2023, after more than 2 years in custody, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia was finally convicted. But the conviction was both a victory and a disappointment for authorities. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for failing to disclose financial transactions related to a car wash she owned in Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco, between 2015 and 2016. The charges were specific and narrow, focusing on her failure to report certain transactions rather than proving her broader involvement in organized crime. This was a deliberate strategy by prosecutors. Rather than trying to prove the more complex charges related to drug trafficking and organized crime, which would have required extensive evidence and carried the risk of acquittal, they focused on financial crimes that were easier to prove and virtually impossible to defend against. But as Rosalinda's lawyer pointed out, the case stopped short of connecting her to organized crime. The prosecution couldn't prove that the money she failed to report came from drug trafficking, and they couldn't establish her direct involvement in the CJNG's violent operations. This was both a legal victory and a practical defeat for Rosalinda. On one hand, she had avoided the more serious charges that could have resulted in decades in prison. On the other hand, she was still facing 5 years behind bars, and her financial empire was in ruins. The conviction also highlighted the challenges that law enforcement faces when dealing with sophisticated financial criminals like Rosalinda. While everyone knew she was the financial mastermind behind one of the world's most powerful drug cartels, proving that in court was a different matter entirely. On February 27, 2025, just days ago as of this recording, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia walked out of the Federal Center for Social Readaptation for Women in Coatlan del Rio, Morelos. She had served approximately 3 years of her 5-year sentence and was released early for good behavior. Her release marks a significant moment in the ongoing story of the CJNG and Mexico's drug war. After years in prison, La Jefa is free again. But the world she's returning to is very different from the one she left behind. During her incarceration, the CJNG continued to operate and even expand its influence. But without Rosalinda's financial expertise, the organization became more dependent on violence and less sophisticated in its business operations. The cartel is still powerful, but it's not the same hybrid criminal corporate entity that she helped create. There are also questions about her relationship with El Mencho. According to Mexican military intelligence, Rosalinda and El Mencho have been separated since her first arrest in 2018. Reports suggest that El Mencho is now in a relationship with a woman named Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. However, Rosalinda and El Mencho remain legally married as of 2025. This separation, if it's real, represents more than just a personal split. It suggests that the power marriage that created the modern CJNG may have run its course. Without the combination of El Mencho's violence and Rosalinda's financial acumen, the cartel may be vulnerable to both law enforcement pressure and competition from rival organizations. Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia's story is ultimately about more than just one woman's rise and fall in the world of organized crime. It's about the evolution of criminal organizations in the 21st century and the increasing sophistication of financial crime. When Rosalinda first married El Mencho in 1996, Mexican cartels were primarily violent gangs that happened to traffic drugs. They were territorial, hierarchical, and dependent on intimidation and corruption to maintain control. The idea of a cartel operating like a multinational corporation was virtually unthinkable, but Rosalinda changed that. Through her financial innovations and business acumen, she helped transform the CJNG into something unprecedented, a criminal organization that could generate legitimate profits while maintaining its illegal operations. She proved that the future of organized crime wasn't just about controlling territory or eliminating competitors. It was about building sustainable business models that could adapt to changing circumstances. Her network of over 70 legitimate businesses wasn't just a money laundering scheme. It was a blueprint for how criminal organizations could integrate themselves into the legal economy. By creating businesses that generated real value and provided real services, she made the CJNG less dependent on drug trafficking alone and more resilient to law enforcement pressure. This model has been copied by criminal organizations around the world, from Russian oligarchs to Chinese triads to Italian-American crime families. The lessons that Rosalinda pioneered in Jalisco have become standard practice for sophisticated criminal enterprises. But her story also illustrates the ultimate limitations of even the most sophisticated criminal operations. Despite all her intelligence, education, and business acumen, Rosalinda couldn't escape the fundamental contradiction at the heart of organized crime: the need to maintain family relationships and personal connections that inevitably create vulnerabilities. Her downfall came not because law enforcement cracked her financial codes or infiltrated her business network. It came because she couldn't abandon her role as a mother and wife, even when doing so would have protected her criminal empire. As Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia begins her new life as a free woman, the question everyone is asking is, what's next for La Jefa? Officially, she's a convicted felon who served time for financial crimes. She's prohibited from engaging in many types of business activities, and she's undoubtedly under constant surveillance by both Mexican and American law enforcement agencies. Any attempt to rebuild her criminal empire would be detected quickly and prosecuted aggressively. But Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia didn't become one of the world's most sophisticated financial criminals by being obvious or predictable. If she chooses to return to criminal activity, it will likely be in ways that are subtle, innovative, and difficult to detect. There's also the question of whether she wants to return to that life at all. After spending 3 years in prison and watching her empire crumble, she may have decided that the costs of criminal activity outweigh the benefits. She's in her late 40s now, with grandchildren and the possibility of a legitimate life ahead of her. But for someone who was once known as La Jefa, the boss, the transition to ordinary life may be more difficult than the transition to prison. Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia spent decades at the center of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations. She controlled billions of dollars, employed thousands of people, and influenced the global drug trade. That kind of power and influence is difficult to give up voluntarily. Whatever she chooses to do next, one thing is certain. The story of Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia has changed the way we think about organized crime, financial crime, and the role of women in criminal organizations. She proved that in the modern world, the most dangerous criminals aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest guns. They're the ones with the smartest accountants. The story of Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia is ultimately a story about power, how it's acquired, how it's maintained, and how it's lost. Born into a world where crime and legitimate business were inseparable, she used her intelligence and ambition to become one of the most influential figures in the history of organized crime. Her marriage to El Mencho wasn't just a personal relationship. It was a strategic alliance that created the most sophisticated criminal organization Mexico had ever seen. By combining violence with financial expertise, territory with legitimate business, they built an empire that challenged traditional assumptions about how criminal organizations operate. But empires built on crime are inherently unstable. No matter how sophisticated the money laundering, how extensive the business network, or how careful the operational security, Criminal organizations ultimately depend on relationships between people, and people have weaknesses, family loyalties, personal emotions, and human needs that can't be eliminated through better planning or more sophisticated technology. Rosalinda's downfall came not because she made a mistake in her financial operations, but because she couldn't abandon her role as a mother. Her arrest at her son's court hearing was the kind of human moment that no amount of criminal sophistication can prevent. As she begins this new chapter of her life, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia remains one of the most fascinating and complex figures in the modern history of organized crime. She's a woman who rose from rural poverty to control billions of dollars, who transformed a violent gang into a multinational corporation, and who proved that in the 21st century, the pen truly can be mightier than the sword. Whether she chooses to rebuild her empire, retire to a quiet life, or find some middle ground between crime and legitimacy, her legacy is already secure. She changed the game forever. She showed the world what's possible when intelligence meets opportunity, when family loyalty combines with criminal ambition, and when a farm girl from Michoacan decides she's destined for more than the quiet life. This has been the story of La Jefa, the boss, the financial mastermind behind the CJNG, the woman who proved that in the world of organized crime, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a brilliant mind that understands how money really works. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden world of Mexico's narco elite, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're constantly uncovering the untold stories behind the headlines, bringing you inside access to the world's most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the most interesting stories are often the ones that never make the evening news.
Her name appears on a U.S. Treasury sanctions list right next to war criminals and terrorists, but there's no mugshot, no arrest warrant, no federal indictment waiting in a courthouse somewhere. Just a name, Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia, buried in financial documents that froze assets worth potentially billions of dollars. The daughter of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the man who ran the Sinaloa cartel for over 4 decades without ever seeing the inside of a prison cell. While her brothers made headlines with arrests and shootouts, while El Chapo's sons became Instagram legends flaunting wealth and weapons, Monica stayed invisible. No social media presence, no paparazzi photos, no leaked videos from nightclub VIP sections, just whispers in Culiacan about the woman who allegedly controlled the financial arteries of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. The Treasury Department sanctioned her in 2021. They claimed she was part of a network moving cartel money through front companies and legitimate businesses. But here's what makes her story different from every other cartel princess you've heard about. She might be the smartest one, because while everyone else fought for the throne and the spotlight, she allegedly built an empire in the shadows. An empire measured not in bullets, but in bank accounts. Not in territory, but in untraceable wealth. If the sons are soldiers playing a short game that ends in prison or death, the daughter might be playing something entirely different. A long game, a quiet game, a billionaire's game. Stay with me until the end, because we're breaking down the life of the woman who might be El Mayo's true heir, the cartel princess who never needed a crown, the invisible billionaire who proves that real power doesn't announce itself, it just exists, protected by silence and strategy. Let's break it down. Monica del Rosario Zambada. Garcia was born into a family that doesn't exist on paper, but controls entire regions of Mexico in reality. Her father, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, is a ghost, 76 years old as of 2024, and never arrested, never imprisoned, never even photographed clearly by law enforcement in decades. He built the Sinaloa cartel alongside El Chapo, but while Chapo chased fame and power publicly, Mayo operated like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, quietly, strategically, always 3 moves ahead. Think about what that means for Monica. She wasn't raised in poverty dreaming of wealth. She was born into established power, born into a family where politicians attended birthday parties, where federal police provided security, where entire towns existed to serve and protect her family's interests. The Zambada family has been described as hidden royalty in narco culture, not the flashy royalty that posts photos with tigers and gold-plated guns. The real royalty, the kind that owns the town but never needs to say it out loud, the kind where everyone knows who you are but nobody ever speaks your name in public. Monica grew up in Culiacan, Sinaloa, the capital of cartel country. But unlike the sons of cartel leaders who grew up learning to shoot and fight, the daughters learned something different. They learned discretion. They learned how to move money without touching it. They learned that real power is invisible power. Her brothers, Vicente Zambada Niebla, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, they became operators. They got involved in the trafficking, the violence, the street-level control, and eventually they got caught. Vicente is serving 15 years in U.S. federal prison. Serafin was arrested at the border. The sons followed the traditional path of cartel heirs, and the traditional path leads to one of two places, prison or a grave. But Monica, different trajectory entirely. She stayed out of the headlines, stayed away from the drug operations, never got photographed at narco parties, or caught on surveillance doing anything that could build a criminal case. And according to federal investigators, that wasn't weakness or fear, that was strategy, because what good is inheriting an empire if you're gonna lose it the same way your brothers did? What good is billions of dollars if you can't actually spend it because you're in a supermax prison? Monica allegedly learned the lesson that most cartel heirs never learn. Violence is temporary, but money is forever. Cartels rise and fall based on who controls the guns. But financial networks, those can last generations if you build them right. And according to the U.S. Treasury Department, that's exactly what she did. Let me tell you about the difference between power you can see and power you can't. When federal agents raided properties connected to El Mayo's organization over the years, they found what you'd expect: weapons caches, stashes, safe houses with escape tunnels. But they also found something else: a sophisticated financial network that moved money through dozens of legitimate businesses, land holdings, agricultural companies, and front operations that looked clean on paper. And Monica's name kept appearing in the investigation files. In March 2021, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, officially sanctioned Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia. They named her alongside her mother, Rosario Niebla Cardosa, and several sisters as part of a network supporting El Mayo's financial operations. Here's what the sanctions specifically alleged: that Monica and other family members helped manage assets for the Zambada organization. Front companies, real estate holdings, ranches that generated legitimate income while serving as operational bases, agricultural businesses that could explain large cash deposits, the kind of infrastructure that turns drug money into clean money. But here's what makes this fascinating: the Treasury Department doesn't need a criminal conviction to sanction someone. They just need evidence that you're part of a financial support network for a designated criminal organization, which means Monica has never been charged with a crime, never been indicted, never been arrested, or publicly wanted by U.S. law enforcement. She's powerful enough to be named, quiet enough to never be caught. Think about how that network might have operated. Picture Monica not in a warehouse counting drug money, but in an office reviewing corporate documents, not meeting with sicarios, but with lawyers and accountants who structure deals that pass every audit. Not trafficking, but trafficking legitimacy. Women in the Zambada family, according to investigators, were linked to cattle ranches that generated millions in revenue, farmland operations that employed hundreds of people legitimately while serving as money laundering fronts, real estate portfolios that appreciated in value while cleaning cartel profits, investment vehicles so sophisticated that tracking the money required forensic accountants and years of investigation. This wasn't the old model of stuffing cash into duffel bags and burying it in the desert. This was corporate level financial engineering, This was turning a criminal empire into a business empire that could survive even if every trafficker in the organization got arrested tomorrow. She didn't need a throne to rule. Her influence was quieter, sharper, and visible. Because here's the thing about real wealth. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need security convoys and gold chains and Instagram posts. Real wealth moves in silence. It exists in property deeds and corporate registrations and offshore accounts that take federal investigators years to untangle. And if the allegations are true, Monica became the architect of that system. Let me paint you a picture of what invisible billionaire life might look like in Culiacan. The properties aren't flashy mansions with gates announcing cartel money. They're elegant homes in exclusive neighborhoods. High walls, yes, but tasteful. Security cameras, definitely, but discreet. From the street, they look like any other wealthy family's residence in Mexico. Maybe a doctor's home, maybe a successful businessman's compound, but inside, that's where the reality reveals itself. Marble floors imported from Italy, chandeliers that cost more than most houses, furniture custom designed by craftsmen who never ask questions about who's paying, wine cellars stocked with bottles worth thousands each, art collections featuring pieces that should be in museums but somehow ended up in private homes. The ranches are even more revealing. Sprawling properties in Sinaloa countryside, thousands of acres of farmland, cattle operations, horse breeding facilities. These places generate legitimate income. They employ local workers, they pay taxes, they look clean, but they also serve as operational bases. Private airstrips for planes that never file flight plans, warehouses that hold more than just farming equipment, security teams that seem excessive for agricultural operations. The kind of infrastructure that serves two purposes, one visible, one invisible. And Monica allegedly moved through all of this with complete discretion. No social media presence revealing locations, no leaked photos from society events, no interviews with lifestyle magazines showing off homes and cars, nothing that could give law enforcement visual evidence or location data. Think about what that level of operational security requires. It means every person in your life is vetted. It means every property is registered through layers of corporate entities. It means every financial transaction is structured to avoid triggering reporting requirements. It means living in luxury, but never showing it publicly. Armored convoys that look like regular SUVs. Bodyguards who dress like business associates. Homes that feature panic rooms and escape routes, but look like normal wealthy residences. The entire lifestyle designed around a single principle: never give them anything they can use against you. The wealth is there, the luxury exists, but it's protected by the most effective security system ever invented: silence. No photos means no evidence. No social media means no location tracking. No public appearances mean no surveillance footage. She exists in the world of the extremely wealthy, but she's a ghost in that world, present but invisible. And that invisibility might be worth more than any amount of money. Now let's talk about what little is known about Monica's personal life, because even relationships in this world are strategic. There are rumors, unconfirmed, unverified, but persistent, that Monica is married. Some reports suggest ties to men within cartel-connected families. Others claim marriages into wealthy business families with historical ties to Sinaloa's power structure. But here's what you need to understand about marriages at this level of organized crime. They're not about love, they're about alliances. In narco culture, particularly in old school Sinaloa cartel families, marriages function like royal arrangements. They connect organizations, they strengthen networks, they create family bonds that protect business interests and provide loyalty that goes deeper than any contract. If Monica married into another powerful family, that marriage represents the merger of resources, territory, and influence. It means combining financial networks. It means shared protection and mutual benefit. It means two families now have a reason to support each other's survival. Think about it like this. Her father, El Mayo, maintained power for 40 years, partially through strategic family connections. Marriages created alliances with other trafficking organizations. They brought together different factions under shared family interests. They turned potential rivals into relatives. And if Monica followed that model, her marriage isn't a personal choice. It's a business decision made by people whose business is worth billions. But again, we don't actually know. No wedding photos have surfaced. No marriage records are publicly available. No social media posts celebrating anniversaries or family life, just whispers and speculation and occasional mentions in investigation documents that reference family connections without specific details. The silence around her personal life is as strategic as everything else, because relationships can be investigated, spouses can be subpoenaed, family connections can become evidence in federal cases. The less that's known publicly, the less prosecutors have to work with. Romance is a liability when you're allegedly managing a criminal empire's finances. So if Monica is married, if she has children, if she has a family life, it's protected by the same operational security that protects everything else about her existence. In this world, love is real, but survival comes first. Here's where Monica's situation gets legally interesting. In March 2021, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned her through OFAC. That sanction designated her as a person providing material support to the Zambada drug trafficking organization. It froze any assets she might have in U.S. financial institutions. It prohibited U.S. persons from doing business with her. It essentially cut her off from the U.S. financial system entirely. But, and this is critical, a Treasury sanction is not a criminal charge. It's a financial penalty, not a legal prosecution. Monica is not publicly listed on FBI most wanted lists. She doesn't appear on DEA fugitive databases. There's no public federal indictment waiting for her in any U.S. district court. At least not that's been unsealed or made public as of now. What does that mean? It means federal investigators believe she's involved enough to punish financially, but either they don't have evidence for criminal charges, or they're building a case that hasn't been revealed yet, or they've made a strategic decision not to prosecute. Think about the calculation from the government's perspective. If you indict Monica, you have to prove her crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. You need witnesses who can testify about her specific actions. You need documents showing she personally directed illegal activity. You need evidence that would convince a jury. But with sanctions, you just need evidence that she's part of the support network. The burden of proof is lower. The political and legal complications are fewer, and you still achieve the goal of disrupting the financial network. So Monica exists in this strange legal space, sanctioned but not wanted, named but not indicted, powerful enough to be targeted by the U.S. government, but quiet enough that they apparently can't build a criminal case or haven't chosen to yet, powerful enough to be named, quiet enough to never be found. And that might be the most impressive thing about her alleged operation. She stayed just far enough from direct criminal activity that prosecution becomes difficult. She's allegedly close enough to the money to benefit from it, but distant enough from the violence and trafficking that building a criminal conspiracy case becomes nearly impossible. It's the difference between being a drug trafficker and being a financial consultant who happens to work for drug traffickers. One gets you life in prison, the other gets you sanctions that you can potentially work around if you're sophisticated enough. And if the allegations are true, Monica is very sophisticated. Let's talk about why Monica might be more valuable to El Mayo than all his sons combined. Her brothers are in U.S. federal prison. Vicente Zambada Niebla, arrested in 2009, extradited to the United States, sentenced to 15 years. Serafine Zambada Ortiz, caught at the border, also extradited served time, and was released. Both followed the traditional path of cartel heirs. They learned the drug business, they operated in the organization, and they got caught. That's the pattern for cartel sons. They're raised to be soldiers, operators, enforcers. They learn violence and trafficking. They build reputations. They take risks. And eventually, almost inevitably, those risks lead to arrest or death. But Monica represents a different model entirely. Low profile equals long-term safety. Every cartel boss who's been captured or killed in the last 20 years, what got them caught? Visibility, phone intercepts from constant communication, surveillance from patterns of movement, informants who knew their locations. The more visible you are, the more vulnerable you become. Monica's invisibility is her armor. No patterns to track, no phone calls to intercept, no public presence to monitor. She's allegedly running a sophisticated financial operation, but she's doing it quietly enough that building a case becomes extremely difficult. Business intelligence instead of violence. The future of organized crime isn't sicarios and street wars. It's money laundering and legitimate business fronts and financial engineering. It's understanding that the real power is in controlling the money, not controlling the territory. If Monica learned that lesson and built her role around it, she's more valuable than 100 gunmen. Less media attention means more protection. Think about El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos. They're famous. They're in corridors. They have social media presence. And what has that fame gotten them? Multiple arrests, constant surveillance, and a short life expectancy. The DEA knows their faces, knows their habits, knows how to find them. Monica, they know her name from treasury documents, but what else? No photos to distribute, no social media to monitor, no public behavior patterns to analyze. She's a name in a file, and that's exponentially harder to prosecute than a visible target, possibly trusted with financial arteries of the cartel. If you're El Mayo and you're thinking about legacy, what matters more? Your sons who might spend the next 20 years in prison, or your daughter who allegedly built a financial network sophisticated enough that it could survive even if the entire drug trafficking operation got shut down tomorrow? The money is what lasts. The money is what provides for family for generations. The money is what buys protection and lawyers and political influence. And if Monica controls that money, she might be the most important person in the entire organization. Here's the thing about El Mayo's 40-year run without arrest. He's not just lucky, he's strategic. He's a businessman who happens to run a drug cartel, not a drug lord who tries to run a business. And if he raised one daughter to think the same way, to prioritize financial sustainability over street reputation, to value invisibility over fame, that's not just smart parenting, that's succession planning. The sons represent the old model, the daughter might represent the future. So let's bring this full circle, because Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia's story is about what we don't see. No viral photos from luxury vacations, no court mugshots after dramatic arrests, no Instagram presence showing designer clothes and expensive cars, no leaked videos from parties with other cartel elites, just a name buried in US sanction files and investigation reports that most people will never read. She exists in the negative space of the drug war. While everyone watches the sons and the violence and the arrests and the spectacle, she's allegedly built something more dangerous, financial infrastructure that could outlast any cartel leader's arrest or death. Think about what that means for the future of organized crime. The old model was territorial control through violence. The new model might be financial control through legitimate business. The old model made you famous and got you killed or imprisoned. The new model makes you invisible and potentially untouchable. If the Treasury Department's allegations are true, Monica helped build that new model. She proved that you don't need to be a trafficker to profit from trafficking. You don't need to order murders to maintain power. You don't need to be famous to be important. You just need to understand that real wealth is patient, quiet, and legal looking enough to survive scrutiny. The sons were raised to be soldiers in a war they couldn't win long term. Every soldier eventually falls, but Monica was allegedly raised to be something different, a financial architect, a legitimate businesswoman whose companies just happen to serve cartel interests, someone who can sit in a lawyer's office or a bank meeting and look like any other wealthy Mexican heir managing family assets. That's the evolution we're watching in real time, the transition from cartels to corporations, from kingpins to CEOs, from violent organizations to financial networks that use violence when necessary, but prefer the clean efficiency of money laundering and legitimate business fronts. And Monica might be the prototype. No one can confirm her exact net worth. No one knows precisely what role she plays in her father's organization. No one has photos of her current appearance or confirmed information about where she lives or what her daily life looks like. She's a ghost with a Treasury Department file, a billionaire who might not exist outside of financial documents, a woman who proves that in the modern drug war, the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. If the sons are soldiers fighting a war with expiration dates measured in years, the daughter might be playing an entirely different game, a generational game, a game where wealth compounds quietly while everyone else makes headlines that lead to prison cells. El Mayo stayed free for 40 years by being smarter than everyone hunting him, by being invisible when others chase fame, by understanding that real power doesn't need an audience. And if Monica learned those lessons, if she built her life around those principles, if she's actually the heir to a multi-billion-dollar financial network, then she might be the most successful cartel princess in history. Not because she's the most violent, not because she's the most famous, but because she's the one nobody saw, the one who built an empire in silence while everyone was watching the spectacle elsewhere. The cartel princess who never needed to show her face, because showing your face is what gets you caught. And Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia has never been caught.
She negotiated with Colombia's most dangerous cocaine suppliers while wearing Chanel. She coordinated multi-million-dollar shipments across the Pacific Ocean from luxury penthouses. She moved through elite social circles in Mexico City by day and managed international drug operations by night. And yet, in a world dominated by violent men, she became something they could never be: invisible, untouchable, and absolutely essential. This is the story of Sandra Avila Beltran, the woman the world would come to know as the Queen of the Pacific, the only woman to ever reach the upper echelons of Mexico's drug trade, the broker who connected Colombian cartels with Mexican distribution networks, the sophisticate who proved you didn't need an army to build an empire, you just needed access, intelligence, and the ability to navigate a world where one wrong move meant death. Born into cartel royalty, raised in criminal luxury, and destined for power that most women in her world could never imagine, this is how she rose to control one of the most crucial positions in the international cocaine trade, and how the life of opulence she built came crashing down in a single moment. October 11, 1960, Mexico City. While most girls born on this day would grow up dreaming of normal futures, careers, families, ordinary lives, Sandra Avila Beltran entered a world where normal didn't exist. She wasn't born into poverty that drove people toward crime. She wasn't born into desperation that made trafficking seem like the only option. She was born into something far more dangerous. She was born into cartel royalty. Her uncle was Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, a name that should send chills down anyone's spine who knows Mexican drug trafficking history. Felix Gallardo wasn't just any trafficker. He was the godfather of the Guadalajara cartel, the organization that essentially created the blueprint for modern Mexican drug trafficking. He was the architect who brought together fragmented trafficking operations into one cohesive, powerful network that would eventually spawn the Sinaloa cartel, the Tijuana cartel, and the Juarez cartel. This was Sandra's uncle. This was her family. From the moment she could understand language, Sandra was surrounded by a world most people only see in movies. Traffickers weren't distant criminals she read about in newspapers. They were family members at holiday dinners. Protection wasn't something you called the police for. It was provided by armed men who worked for her relatives. Money wasn't earned through traditional jobs. It flowed from operations that moved tons of marijuana and cocaine across borders. And most importantly, silence wasn't just a virtue in her family. It was survival. Imagine growing up in this environment. While other children in Mexico City were learning about their parents' office jobs or businesses, Sandra was absorbing the unspoken rules of a different world entirely. She learned which conversations happened behind closed doors. She learned which questions you never asked. She learned that wealth could appear from nowhere and men could disappear just as quickly. But here's what made Sandra different from the children of other cartel figures, particularly the boys, who would grow up to become the violent enforcers and plaza bosses we know today. She was paying attention to the logistics, not the violence. She wasn't interested in being a sicario or a plaza boss. Those positions required brutality, constant warfare, short lifespans. Sandra was observing something else entirely: the networks, the connections, the business relationships that made everything possible. By the time she was a teenager, Sandra had already internalized lessons that most MBA students never learn. She understood supply chains before she could define the term. She grasped the importance of relationships in business, even if that business happened to be international cocaine trafficking. She recognized that in a world of violent, ego-driven men, there was power in being the person who facilitated connections rather than demanding territory. Her family connections gave her something invaluable: credibility and access. In the cartel world, trust is everything, and trust is earned through blood. Sandra had that blood. She didn't need to prove herself through violence because her last name did the work for her. She didn't need to prove herself through violence because her last name did the work for her. When she spoke, people listened, not because she threatened them, but because rejecting someone with her family connections could have deadly consequences. But Sandra was smart enough to know that family connections alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to make herself useful, valuable, essential. And that's exactly what she set out to do. Unlike the men in her family's world who built their reputations through violence and territorial control, Sandra built hers through a different kind of power. She became indispensable as a connector, a facilitator, a broker between worlds that didn't naturally intersect. The late 1980s and early 1990s were transformative years for Mexican drug trafficking. The Guadalajara cartel was fracturing after her uncle's arrest. The Sinaloa cartel was emerging as a dominant force. Colombian cartels, particularly Medellin and Cali, needed new routes into the United States as their Caribbean pathways became too heavily monitored. Mexican organizations needed reliable cocaine supplies to meet growing American demand. This created a perfect opportunity for someone like Sandra, someone who could navigate both worlds, who understood Mexican cartel politics through her family connections, but could also present herself as sophisticated, trustworthy, and professional enough to deal with Colombian suppliers, who were often more businesslike than their Mexican counterparts. For Sandra, the cartel world wasn't an option she chose. It was the environment she was raised in, the only world she truly knew, and the place where her particular skills could make her wealthy and powerful beyond most people's imagination. Here's where Sandra's story becomes unlike any other woman's story in cartel history, and unlike most men's stories too. She didn't enter the drug trade through violence. She didn't build a reputation by eliminating rivals or controlling territory. She did something far more sophisticated and ultimately more powerful. She became the person who made deals happen between people who couldn't afford to trust anyone. In the male-dominated world of drug trafficking, most positions were filled through violence, loyalty proven through bloodshed, and power maintained through fear. Sandra operated in a completely different space. She wasn't a shooter or an enforcer. She didn't command sicarios or control plazas. What she commanded was something potentially more valuable. She commanded access. Her role evolved into coordinating large-scale cocaine shipments between Colombian producers and Mexican distributors. But to understand how sophisticated this actually was, you need to understand the complexity of international cocaine trafficking in the 1990s and early 2000s. Colombian cartels controlled the production. They had the coca fields, the processing labs, the chemists, and the initial product. But they needed pathways into the United States, which consumed the vast majority of their product. Mexican cartels controlled those pathways. They had the border infrastructure, the corruption networks, the distribution systems within the United States. The problem was trust. Colombian traffickers had been burned by Mexican partners who took shipments and never paid. Mexican traffickers had been burned by Colombians who provided low-quality product or shorted shipments. Everyone was paranoid, everyone was armed, and everyone knew that business disputes in this world got settled with bullets, not lawyers. This is where Sandra became invaluable. She could speak both languages, literally and figuratively. She understood the Mexican side through her family connections and decades of exposure to that world. She learned the Colombian side through careful relationship building, probably starting with lower-level connections and working her way up as she proved reliable. She wasn't running corners or managing street-level distribution. She was running conversations between the most powerful criminals in the hemisphere. She was facilitating introductions that led to shipments worth tens of millions of dollars. She was solving logistical problems that could make or break entire operations. Imagine the scenario. A Colombian supplier has 2 tons of high-quality cocaine ready to move. A Mexican organization has the routes to get it across the US border and into American cities, where it can be sold for an enormous markup, but they don't trust each other. They've never worked together. They're in different countries, speak different languages, operate under different codes. Sandra walks into this scenario and changes everything. She knows people on both sides. She can vouch for both parties based on her reputation and connections. She can facilitate the meeting, help structure the deal, coordinate the logistics, and ensure payment flows properly. And for this service, she takes a percentage, usually a significant percentage given how valuable her role is. This was her genius. She didn't need an army of sicarios because she wasn't trying to control territory. She didn't need to be the most violent person in the room because violence wasn't her tool. Her tools were relationship management, discretion, reliability, and the ability to solve complex logistical problems that others couldn't. The Pacific Ocean became her domain, hence the nickname that would define her legacy, the Queen of the Pacific. While other traffickers focused on land routes through border towns like Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, and Nuevo Laredo, Sandra specialized in maritime trafficking routes. Cocaine moved by cargo ships hidden in legitimate freight. It moved by fishing vessels that looked like they were just working normal Pacific routes. It moved in shipping containers that would blend in among thousands of other containers moving through ports every single day. This maritime trafficking was more complex than land routes. It required more sophisticated coordination, more technical knowledge, more legitimate-looking cover operations, but it also offered advantages. Less direct law enforcement scrutiny than border crossings, ability to move larger quantities in single shipments, more flexibility in landing points along thousands of miles of coastline. And this is where Sandra excelled, coordinating these complex, high-value operations that required precision, patience, and extensive networks of corrupt port officials, shipping company employees, and cartel members who could handle receiving shipments. Her nickname, Queen of the Pacific, came from this role in maritime trafficking operations. She wasn't just a participant. She was reportedly one of the most important facilitators of these Pacific routes, the person who could make connections happen that others couldn't. Now, here's an important clarification that matters for credibility and accuracy. Sandra was not the boss of the Sinaloa cartel. She was not running the entire operation or making strategic decisions about cartel policy. The media sometimes portrayed her as having more direct control than evidence suggests she actually had. What she was, based on available evidence from her case and law enforcement investigations, was an independent high-level broker. She worked with top figures in various organizations, likely including people connected to what became the Sinaloa cartel, but she wasn't under their command structure. She was a valued contractor, an essential facilitator, someone they worked with rather than someone who worked for them. This distinction matters because it explains both her power and her survival. She didn't have the target on her back that comes with being a cartel leader. She didn't have rivals trying to kill her to take her position, because her position wasn't about controlling territory, it was about relationships and trust, things that can't be taken through violence. Sandra didn't control armies, she controlled access. And in the drug trafficking world, controlling access to reliable suppliers, trustworthy transportation networks, and discrete payment systems can be just as valuable as controlling armed men. Her operations were sophisticated. Law enforcement would later describe her involvement in shipments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She allegedly helped coordinate deliveries that brought tons of cocaine into Mexico for distribution northward into the United States. And she did all of this while maintaining a public persona that was completely at odds with her secret life. This wasn't some street-level dealer trying to act rich. This was a woman actually living at the highest levels of society, funded by profits from one of the most lucrative illegal enterprises in human history. If you saw Sandra Avila Beltran at a high-end restaurant in Mexico City, at a luxury resort in the Caribbean, or shopping in Paris, you would never guess you were looking at one of the most connected drug traffickers in the world. And that was exactly the point. While male cartel leaders often flaunted their wealth in ways that drew attention, golden guns, exotic animals, ostentatious parties, Sandra understood that true power in her position required discretion paired with unmistakable quality. She lived an extremely lavish lifestyle, but she wore it like someone born to it, which in many ways, she was. Let me paint you a picture of how the Queen of the Pacific actually lived, because this is where her story becomes visually stunning, even as the source of her wealth remains morally reprehensible. Sandra was known for her impeccable fashion sense. We're not talking about flashy, logo-covered designer pieces that scream for attention. We're talking about haute couture, custom-tailored clothing from the world's most exclusive fashion houses, Chanel suits that fit her perfectly, Hermes bags that cost more than most people make in a year, jewelry from Cartier and other elite brands, pieces that were elegant rather than gaudy. Her appearance was always flawless, hair perfectly styled, makeup applied with expert precision, an aura of wealth and refinement that seemed effortless, but was actually carefully curated. She looked like old money, like someone who'd always had access to the finest things in life. And in a way, that was true. She had grown up around wealth generated by her family's involvement in trafficking. She knew how the truly wealthy dressed, how they moved, how they carried themselves. She wasn't trying to look rich. She was rich, and she knew exactly how to present that fact. She traveled frequently and not on commercial airlines when she could avoid it. Private jets became her preferred method of movement, allowing her to cross international borders with minimal scrutiny while enjoying luxury that most people will never experience. Imagine stepping onto a private aircraft, being served champagne before takeoff, flying wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted, with complete privacy and comfort. Her properties were equally impressive. While exact details of her real estate holdings are difficult to verify, she was smart enough to use shell companies and front names to hide ownership. Reports suggest she maintained luxury residences in multiple locations across Mexico. These weren't just nice houses. We're talking about properties in elite neighborhoods, penthouses with ocean views, homes with extensive security systems, pools, and amenities that represented pure indulgence. She drove expensive vehicles, or more accurately, was driven in them. High-end cars that matched her sophisticated image, again chosen for quality and discretion rather than flash. A luxury Mercedes or BMW rather than a gold-plated Ferrari, if you understand the distinction. Her social circles included Mexico's elite. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of her story. She managed to exist in legitimate high society while simultaneously running international drug operations. She attended exclusive events, maintained relationships with people from business and social elite circles, presented herself as a successful businesswoman. And technically, she was a businesswoman, just not in any legitimate sense. The money that funded this lifestyle came through complex financial networks. shell companies that appeared to run legitimate businesses, front operations that generated paperwork showing legal income, money laundering schemes that cleaned drug profits into seemingly legitimate wealth. Millions of dollars flowing through these systems, allowing her to live like royalty, while the source of her money remained obscured. But here's what separated Sandra from the stereotypical image of drug dealers. She wasn't flashy on the streets. She wasn't posting photos with guns and stacks of cash on social media, though social media wasn't the factor in the 1990s that it is today. She wasn't making public spectacles that would draw law enforcement attention. She was untouchable behind closed doors, living a life of incredible luxury that was visible to those in her social circle, but didn't create the kind of public profile that would make her an obvious target for investigation. The Queen of the Pacific understood that the best way to enjoy drug profits was to spend them in ways that looked legitimate, mixing with people who would never suspect her real source of income. Her lifestyle also included constant security, though again, more discreet than the armies of bodyguards that male cartel leaders often employed. She likely had people whose job was to ensure her safety, to monitor potential threats, to provide early warning if law enforcement or rivals started getting too close. But this security would have been subtle, professional, not the obvious armed guards that draw attention. The contradiction of Sandra's life was stunning when you really think about it. By day, she was a sophisticated woman of means, indistinguishable from other wealthy women in Mexico City's elite circles. By night, or more accurately, in her secret business life that ran parallel to her public persona, she was facilitating cocaine shipments that would fuel America's drug epidemic, destroy lives, and generate violence across multiple countries. She compartmentalized these two realities in ways that most people couldn't imagine, negotiating a multi-million-dollar cocaine deal in the morning, then attending a charity gala that evening, coordinating with Colombian suppliers about shipment logistics, then shopping for designer clothes as if she didn't have a care in the world. This wasn't just about enjoying luxury, it was strategic. The more legitimate she appeared, the more she could operate in plain sight. The more she fit into high society, the less likely authorities were to suspect her of being deeply involved in international drug trafficking. Her sophistication was both genuine and a form of camouflage. But as with all things in the drug trafficking world, this life of luxury came with an expiration date. Because no matter how sophisticated your operation, no matter how careful your security, no matter how well you blend into legitimate society, eventually, law enforcement catches up, or your partner's mistakes expose you, or someone close to you becomes the weak link that brings everything down. For Sandra, that moment came in 2007, and it came from a direction she might not have fully anticipated. Juan Diego Espinoza Ramirez, known in the drug world as El Tigre, the Tiger, was Sandra's romantic partner and business associate. He was a significant trafficker in his own right, connected to major cocaine operations. And in 2007, his luck ran out in the most final way possible. Espinoza was killed in a confrontation with authorities. The exact circumstances of his death are less important than what happened after. His death exposed communications, connections, and operational details that law enforcement had been trying to uncover for years. When authorities investigated Espinoza's death and seized his phones, computers, and documents, they found threads that led to Sandra. Wiretaps were initiated, surveillance was intensified, financial records were subpoenaed, and slowly, investigators began building a case against the woman who had managed to operate in the shadows for so long. For someone who had successfully maintained operational security for years, who had avoided the kind of high-profile mistakes that brought down other traffickers, this must have been devastating. She hadn't made the critical error, her partner had. Or more accurately, his death had made him vulnerable in ways he couldn't be while alive. The investigation likely revealed communications between Sandra and Colombian suppliers, financial transfers that were hard to explain through legitimate business, travel patterns that coincided with known drug trafficking operations, testimony from cooperating witnesses who could place her at meetings or discussions about drug shipments. Law enforcement across multiple agencies, Mexican Federal Police, DEA, and others, coordinated to build their case. And when they finally moved to make their arrest, they chose their moment carefully. September 28, 2007, Mexico City. Sandra Avila Beltran was taken into custody in an operation that made international headlines almost immediately, because this wasn't just another drug trafficker being arrested. This was the Queen of the Pacific, one of the few women to ever reach the upper levels of international drug trafficking, being led away in handcuffs. The images from her arrest shocked people around the world, though probably for the wrong reasons. Instead of looking like the hardened criminal many expected, Sandra appeared calm, composed, and well-dressed even in custody. Her demeanor wasn't that of someone who'd been violently dragged from hiding. She looked more like a businesswoman who'd been inconvenienced, maintaining her dignity even in the worst moment of her life. Media coverage was immediate and intense. Newspapers and television news programs across Mexico, the United States, and internationally ran stories about La Reina del Pacifico, the beautiful woman who'd allegedly moved millions of dollars in cocaine, the sophisticated socialite with secret cartel connections, the femme fatale of the drug world. Some of this coverage bordered on sensationalism. There was an element of fascination, perhaps even admiration from some quarters, that would never be extended to male cartel figures. The media seemed almost captivated by the contradiction she represented: beauty and criminality, sophistication and violence, femininity and power in a masculine world. But beneath the superficial media narratives, Sandra was facing very real legal consequences. Mexican authorities charged her with organized crime offenses related to drug trafficking and money laundering. The evidence against her included financial records, intercepted communications, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who described her role in facilitating cocaine shipments. For the first time, the world saw the face behind the whispers. The woman who'd operated so successfully in the shadows was now completely exposed. Her photograph on front pages, her name in headlines, her past and activities being dissected by journalists and investigators. In Mexican custody, Sandra maintained her composed demeanor. Unlike some traffickers who break down when arrested or immediately start trying to negotiate cooperation agreements, Sandra reportedly stayed relatively quiet, maintaining that she was a legitimate businesswoman being persecuted for her family connections rather than her own actions. This defense was always going to be difficult to sustain given the evidence, but it spoke to her intelligence that she wasn't making the mistake of talking too much or making admissions that could strengthen the case against her. The legal process moved forward, and Sandra was convicted in Mexico on drug-related charges. But her legal troubles were far from over. The United States wanted her too. In 2012, Sandra Avila Beltran was extradited to the United States to face federal drug conspiracy charges. This was a significant escalation. Mexican prison was one thing, but American federal prison and the possibility of decades in a U.S. facility was something else entirely. The United States government had been building its own case against Sandra, separate from the Mexican charges. American prosecutors had evidence of her involvement in conspiracies to import cocaine into the United States, conspiracies that violated numerous federal drug laws and could carry severe sentences. When she arrived in the United States to face these charges, Sandra was entering a legal system that's notoriously harsh on drug trafficking cases, particularly cases involving large quantities of cocaine. Federal sentencing guidelines for drug crimes are among the strictest in the world, and defendants with her alleged level of involvement typically face decades in prison. But here's where Sandra's case took an interesting turn that reveals something important about her actual role versus her media-created image. She was never sentenced to life in prison. In fact, her ultimate sentence was far less than what many expected, and significantly less than what other major traffickers have received. Why? several factors come into play. First, while Sandra had clearly been involved in significant drug trafficking operations, she wasn't charged with violence. Unlike male cartel leaders whose cases include murder, torture, and terrorism charges. In addition to drug trafficking, Sandra's case was purely about moving drugs and laundering money. Federal judges have some discretion in sentencing, and lack of violence can be a mitigating factor. Second, her role as an intermediary, rather than a cartel leader, mattered legally. Prosecutors could prove she facilitated trafficking, but proving she controlled entire operations or made ultimate decisions was harder. She was essential to certain deals happening, but she wasn't the boss of an entire organization in the way that, say, El Chapo was. Third, and this is where things get murky, there are suggestions that Sandra cooperated to a limited extent. Not full cooperation that would have required her to testify against major figures, but perhaps providing some information that was useful to investigators. This kind of limited cooperation can result in sentence reductions without the defendant becoming a full cooperating witness. The exact details of her cooperation, if any occurred, remain unclear. But what we know for certain is that her sentence was ultimately far less than the life imprisonment that seemed possible when she was first extradited. She served time in federal custody, years of her life spent in American prisons, a dramatic fall from the luxury lifestyle she'd once enjoyed. But eventually, she completed her sentence, and the legal process that had defined years of her life came to an end. Unlike most major cartel figures, Sandra Avila Beltran didn't die violently in a shootout with rivals or authorities. She didn't receive a life sentence that would see her die in prison. She survived the legal. Sandra Avila Beltran was released from custody and returned to civilian life. This alone makes her story unusual in the world of high-level drug trafficking. Most people who reach her level of involvement end up dead or permanently imprisoned. She managed to survive both fates, but survival came at a cost. The life of luxury she once enjoyed is gone. The sophisticated social circles she once moved through are closed to her. The power and influence she once wielded have evaporated. She's no longer the queen of the Pacific. She's a former trafficker trying to exist in a world that has moved on without her. There are no confirmed reports of Sandra returning to drug trafficking after her release. At her age, with her legal history, and with the intense scrutiny she would face from law enforcement in any jurisdiction, a return to that life would be extraordinarily risky. It would almost certainly lead to rearrest and much harsher consequences given her prior convictions. Instead, Sandra has largely disappeared from public view. She avoids media interviews and public appearances. There are no social media accounts broadcasting her current life, no magazine profiles or documentary participation. She has essentially vanished into quiet civilian existence. This disappearance is strategic. Any public profile would bring renewed attention from law enforcement, from journalists, from people in the drug world who might have grudges or scores to settle. Staying out of the spotlight is her best chance at living peacefully. But one has to wonder, what does life look like for someone like Sandra now? How do you go from facilitating multi-million-dollar cocaine deals to civilian obscurity? How do you process the years lost to prison, the lifestyle lost to conviction, the power that evaporated the moment handcuffs closed around your wrists? These are questions Sandra hasn't answered publicly and probably never will. Her story ends not with violence or drama, but with quiet disappearance into whatever life former cartel queens live when their reign is over. Unlike most cartel figures, Sandra Avila Beltran didn't die violently. She disappeared quietly. And perhaps that's the most fitting end for a woman who spent years operating in the shadows, powerful but invisible, essential but unknown to most of the world. Sandra Avila Beltran's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the drug trade, about gender, about power, and about the systems that create people like her. She was born into a world she didn't choose, raised in an environment environment where drug trafficking was normalized, surrounded by role models who were criminals? Did she ever have a chance at a legitimate life? Or was her path always going to lead into the drug trade because that was the only world she truly knew? She used her intelligence and sophistication to build power in a male-dominated criminal enterprise, proving that women could navigate that world successfully. But should we celebrate that as some kind of feminist achievement? Or should we recognize that her success came at the cost of countless lives destroyed by the cocaine she helped traffic? She lived a life of luxury that most people can only dream of: private jets, designer wardrobes, penthouses, and elite social circles. But that luxury was built on a foundation of addiction, violence, and death. Can beauty and sophistication make those origins more palatable, or does it actually make them more disturbing? She survived where most cartel figures die or face life imprisonment. She's free now, living somewhere quietly. Her story known, but her current existence unknown. Is that a happy ending, or is it just a different kind of prison? Freedom haunted by everything lost and everything done to achieve power that ultimately meant nothing. Sandra Avila Beltran was many things: sophisticated, intelligent, powerful, connected, wealthy. But at her core, she was a facilitator of one of the most destructive trades in human history. She helped move cocaine that fueled America's drug epidemic. She profited from addiction and death. No amount of beauty or refinement changes that fundamental reality. The Queen of the Pacific reigned for years in the shadows, more powerful than most people realized, more essential to international drug trafficking than anyone suspected. But queens can fall, empires can crumble, and sophistication offers no protection when the law finally catches up. Her story is a reminder that the drug trade isn't just violent men with guns. It's also sophisticated networks, complex operations, and people smart enough to facilitate the movement of billions of dollars in illegal drugs across borders and oceans. Sandra proved that women could reach those heights just as well as men. Whether that's a victory or a tragedy depends on your perspective. But what's undeniable is that Sandra Avila Beltran carved out a unique place in cartel history. The beautiful, sophisticated Queen of the Pacific, who moved cocaine with the same ease that she moved through elite social circles, who negotiated with killers while wearing designer clothes, who built an empire of access in a world of violence. She's free now somewhere, living whatever life former queens live. And the Pacific Ocean still carries ships across its waters, just as it did when Sandra was coordinating cocaine shipments from Colombia to Mexico. The trade continues, the violence continues, the addiction continues. But the Queen? The Queen has disappeared into the quiet obscurity of civilian life. Her reign over, her legend secure, her current existence a mystery she'll likely never reveal. What does the most dangerous woman in Mexico look like? You know the Sinaloa cartel, El Chapo, El Mayo, Los Antrax, the deadliest hit squad in the entire Mexican drug war, responsible for torture, beheadings, bodies strung from bridges, and hundreds of murders across Sinaloa. A killing machine so feared that even rival cartel bosses refused to speak their name out loud without lowering their voices. But what if I told you that when the man who ran that squad got arrested, when the Mexican government and the DEA finally took down El Chino Antrax, the person who allegedly stepped into his shoes wasn't a battle-hardened sicario with a body count. It wasn't a general, it wasn't a warlord, it was a 27-year-old woman from Culiacan with 3 kids, a nursing degree, and 294,000 Instagram followers. Meet Claudia Berenice Ochoa Felix. Known to the narco world as La Imperatriz de los Antrax, the Empress of Antrax, she wielded pink and gold AK-47s. She posed on private jets and yachts with designer handbags draped over her shoulder. She kept lions and leopards as pets. She survived at least one assassination attempt where a woman was mistaken for her and killed in her place. She moved through the cartel world like a ghost, always present, never officially confirmed, always one step ahead of anyone trying to put a name to what she was. The Mexican government called her a social media personality. The cartels called her the Empress. The streets of Culiacan called her untouchable. Today we go inside the full story. The girl who grew up in one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, the woman who married into cartel royalty, the figure the world came to know as the Kim Kardashian of organized crime, and the mysterious night in September 2019 when all of it ended in a private home on an island in Culiacan, and whether that ending was as innocent as the official story claims. This is the story of Claudia Berenice Ochoa Felix, alias La Imperatriz de los Antrax, the most glamorous figure in the history of Mexican narco culture, and possibly the most dangerous woman nobody could ever officially prove existed. Let's get into it. Claudia Berenice Ochoa Felix was born on January 15, 1987 in Culiacan, Sinaloa. If you don't know Culiacan, you need to understand what kind of city this is. It's the capital of Sinaloa State. It's also the birthplace, the headquarters, and the spiritual home of the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel. This is the city that produced El Chapo, the city where El Mayo Zambada's children grew up, the city where narco culture isn't something you see on the news. It's the water you drink, the air you breathe, the way conversations go quiet when certain names get mentioned at the dinner table. Claudia grew up in a neighborhood called Canaco, a middle-class residential area in the city. Not a shack, not poverty, a real home, a real family, a real childhood by most measures. She attended the Colegio de Bachilleres de Sinaloa for high school. She was ambitious enough to enroll in nursing school after. By every surface metric, she was on a perfectly normal trajectory. But Culiacan doesn't let normal be simple. In a city where the cartel isn't an abstract news story, but a daily reality, where the most powerful men in the state are traffickers, and the most visible displays of wealth come from drug money. The line between civilian and cartel world is thinner than outsiders understand. It doesn't take a dramatic choice to cross it. Sometimes it just takes meeting the right person. For Claudia, that person was Juan Carlos Felix Gastelum, known in cartel circles as El Chavo Felix. El Chavo wasn't street level. He was a security chief for the Sinaloa cartel, a man who ran protection operations for some of the most important figures in the entire organization. And then he made a move that elevated his status even further. He married Teresita Zambada, one of the daughters of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the co-founder and most enduring boss of the Sinaloa cartel. That marriage made El Chavo Felix family. Literally, cartel family, and Claudia was his wife. She had 3 children with El Chavo. She was living deep inside the inner circle of the most powerful criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. Not on the edges, not as a distant relative, but in the household of a man directly connected to the man who had run the Sinaloa cartel for decades alongside El Chapo. That was the world Claudia Ochoa Felix grew up into as an adult. And then she met someone who would take her even deeper. His name was Jose Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa, and in Sinaloa, everyone knew who he was, El Chino Antrax. He was born in 1980 in Culiacan, raised in the same streets, the same culture, the same orbit as Claudia. He had grown up close to El Mayo Zambada's sons, childhood friendships that became professional ones when he started working for the cartel as a bodyguard for Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Mayo's eldest son. In 2008, when the Sinaloa cartel split from the Beltran Leyva organization and the drug war in Sinaloa went from a business competition to an open military conflict, El Chino Antrax did something that would define the next decade. He founded Los Antrax, named after the bacterium, built like a special forces unit. Los Antrax became the Sinaloa cartel's most feared enforcement arm. Personal bodyguards and hit squad for El Mayo Zambada himself. They didn't just move drugs, they waged war. They tortured rivals and strung their bodies from bridges. They conducted raids that left dozens dead in a single afternoon. They wore diamond-studded skull rings that became their calling card, the way a signature gets left at a crime scene. El Chino Antrax ran all of it, and he and Claudia became romantically involved. The exact timeline of when their relationship began and what it overlapped with is murky in the way that everything in this world is murky. What is documented is the result. Claudia Ochoa Felix was connected to 2 of the most powerful men in the Sinaloa cartel ecosystem simultaneously. Her ex-husband, El Chavo Felix, who had married into El Mayo's family, and El Chino Antrax, who ran El Mayo's personal assassination squad. In the world she occupied, that wasn't a scandal, that was a resume. Then came December 30th, 2013, the day everything shifted. El Chino Antrax walked off a KLM flight from Mexico City at Amsterdam Airport Schiphol. He was traveling under a fake name, Norberto Siqueiros Garcia. He had undergone significant plastic surgery to change his appearance. He had attempted to alter his fingerprints. Despite all of it, U.S. law enforcement, working through Interpol, had tracked him there, confirmed his identity through forensic techniques, and was waiting. Dutch police arrested him at the gate. The head of Los Antrax, the founder of the Sinaloa cartel's most elite killing unit, the man who provided personal security for one of the most wanted drug lords in the world, was taken down not in a firefight in the mountains of Sinaloa, but in an airport departure lounge in the Netherlands. He was extradited to the United States, booked into federal custody in San Diego, and charged with conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. He pleaded guilty in March 2015. Los Antrax was now leaderless. And within months, the rumor that would define Claudia Ochoa Felix's public identity began spreading across Mexican media, British tabloids, and social networks worldwide. La Emperatriz de los Antrax had assumed command. By 2014, Claudia Ochoa Felix was a phenomenon, or someone built it for her, which is a question that never got fully answered. The photos were the foundation. Starting in 2013, images circulated on social media that showed Claudia living a life that looked like a narco fever dream. Private jets, yachts in blue water, sports cars in the driveway, Ferraris, BMWs, Lamborghinis, designer handbags that cost more than most Culiacan residents made in a year. She posed with lions. She posed with leopards. She reclined in pools on properties that looked like five-star resorts. And in the same photo set, she'd be holding a gold-plated AK-47, barrel pointed at the camera, expression completely unbothered. Pink AK-47s, gold AK-47s, military camouflage AK-47s. The guns were never far. She looked like Kim Kardashian, not vaguely, specifically. The same dark hair, the same features, the same aesthetic of weaponized femininity deployed across social media for maximum impact. The comparison spread globally. Mexican newspapers picked it up. International outlets ran with it. The Kim Kardashian of organized crime became her second nickname, layered on top of La Emperatriz. But she wasn't just beautiful and well-connected. According to people inside cartel circles, and according to the Whisper network that functions as the real press in Sinaloa, Claudia wasn't just photographing herself with guns for the aesthetic. She was allegedly running operations. Los Antrax, in the period following El Chino's arrest, did not collapse. The unit continued. According to reporting by British newspapers and sources inside Mexican law enforcement, Claudia had moved into a leadership role, coordinating the group's activities, maintaining the relationships that kept Los Antrax connected to El Mayo Zambada's power structure, and using the social media presence as a deliberate image operation. The Diamond Skull Ring crew was still working. The hits were still happening. The cartel's enforcement arm was still intact. What had changed was who was running it. In Culiacan, her name started getting spoken in the same tones that narco bosses' names get spoken. Never too loud. Always with the implicit understanding that words in this city travel further than you intend. She was also, allegedly, a target. In the months after El Chino's arrest, sources in Mexican media reported that at least one assassination attempt had been carried out against Claudia, and that the assassins had killed the wrong woman. A woman who had been mistaken for Claudia, whose resemblance was close enough to fool the gunman, was killed in her place. Claudia survived. Her following on social media surged in the immediate aftermath. Thousands of new followers drawn by a mix of fear and fascination. In any other world, you survive an assassination attempt and you go into hiding. You lower your profile, you disappear. Claudia Ochoa Felix posted more photos. She also put out a newspaper ad claiming to be a legitimate businesswoman who had nothing to do with organized crime. She held a press conference in June 2014, flanked by her children and her brother. and read a prepared statement declaring that the social media accounts linking her to Los Antrax were not hers, that the photos attributed to her weren't even of her, and that she was a victim of a defamation campaign that had put her life in danger. The press conference was the kind of move you only make if you're either completely innocent or so confident in your protection that official denial is the cleanest option available. In Culiacan, those two things are sometimes hard to distinguish. What was not in dispute? By the end of 2014, Claudia Ochoa Felix was one of the most recognized faces in Mexican narco culture, more internationally famous than most actual cartel bosses, more photographed than most capos who had been operating for decades, and still entirely free, entirely uncharged, and entirely unconfirmed as anything other than a woman with controversial social media accounts and powerful friends. The narco world had never seen anything quite like her. To understand what Claudia's day-to-day existence looked like at the height of her notoriety, you have to understand what Culiacan's cartel elite actually lived like. This wasn't scarcity. This wasn't hiding in bunkers and moving between safe houses in darkness. The Sinaloa cartel at its peak controlled operations across 28 of Mexico's 32 states, ran distribution networks in 50 countries, and generated billions in annual revenue. The people at the top didn't live like fugitives. They lived like royalty. The nightclubs of Culiacan, Mazatlan, and Guadalajara were their courts, tables surrounded by armed bodyguards, bottles that cost more than the monthly wages of everyone else in the room combined. The best restaurants, the best hotels, private flights between cities, horses, ranches, animals that you'd normally only see in a zoo. Claudia was in the center of all of it. She was a fixture in the clubs that the cartel elite frequented, always surrounded by armed men, always photographed, always carrying the dual identity of glamorous woman and alleged commander. Her Instagram documented a life that read like a checklist of narco aspiration. Here she is, on a yacht off the coast. Here she is, in a private jet. Here she is posed with a custom weapon that costs more than most people's cars. But there was another layer to what her photos communicated, and it was deliberate. The guns weren't decoration. In narco culture, publicly displaying weapons is a statement of power. It says, I am protected. It says, I am untouchable. It says, whoever might be thinking about coming for me should look at this photo and think twice. When Claudia posed with a pink AK-47 for 294,000 followers, she wasn't doing it the way a pop star does a photo shoot. She was advertising her security arrangement to anyone who might be calculating whether she was vulnerable. And the social media accounts themselves, whatever their true origin, functioned as a form of narco branding that the cartel world hadn't really seen in that form before. Los Antrax were already famous for their diamond skull rings, for the songs commissioned about their exploits. But Claudia put a face on it. A specific, recognizable, globally viral face. The Empress wasn't just feared in Sinaloa. She was talked about in news articles in the UK and the US and Europe. The story expanded. Reports emerged that Claudia had been living in Argentina, specifically in Nordelta, one of the most exclusive gated residential communities in Buenos Aires, for approximately 3 years. She allegedly kept a full security detail, had access to a private plane, and maintained a polo horse ranch on the property. She was living the kind of life that ultra-wealthy Mexicans flee to Argentina to live when they want distance from whatever is happening back home. What was happening back home was increasingly volatile. The Sinaloa cartel was fracturing along generational lines. El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, were building their own fentanyl empire and operating with increasing independence from El Mayo Zambada's old guard. The cartel that had been one unified structure was becoming something more complicated. The loyalties that had kept people alive were being renegotiated in real time. In that environment, being the face of Los Antrax, publicly, visibly, internationally, was a particular kind of exposure. And then, back in Culiacan, the world that had made her famous started closing in. One of her last public social media gestures said everything about where her loyalties actually sat. In the months before her death, she publicly posted a photo of herself wearing a Chapo 701 brand hoodie, a clothing line launched by Alejandrina Guzman, El Chapo's daughter, and personally tagged Alejandrina to thank her for the gift. A woman who claimed to have no connection to the cartel world was publicly thanking El Chapo's daughter for cartel-branded merchandise on her verified social media account. Whether that was defiance, tribute, or something else entirely, only Claudia knew. It is the night of Friday, September 13th, 2019. Culiacan, Sinaloa. Claudia Ochoa Felix is 32 years old. She is a mother of 3. She is one of the most recognized faces in Mexican narco culture. She is alive, which, given everything, is already remarkable. That night, she attends a gathering in the city center of Culiacan. She is accompanied by a man whose identity is described only as a companion, a man whose name authorities obtain but do not publicly release. They drink. The night moves the way nights in Culiacan move for people like Claudia, in private spaces, surrounded by the specific kind of luxury that comes with being connected to the right people. In the early morning hours of Saturday, September 14th, she and the companion retire to a private home in the Pontevedra development on Isla Musala, a private residential island inside the city of Culiacan, accessible only to residents and their guests. This is not a random location. This is the kind of address that costs money to have access to. They continue drinking. The night extends into early morning. At some point, Claudia stops responding. The companion tries to wake her. She doesn't respond. He calls paramedics. When emergency services arrive at the private home in Pontevedra on the morning of September 14th, 2019, Claudia Berenice Ochoa Felix is pronounced dead at the scene. She is 32 years old. Her 3 children are now motherless. The Sinaloa State Attorney General's office moves quickly. Prosecutor Juan Jose Rios Estavillo confirms the death and addresses what everyone in Culiacan is already asking. Was she murdered? His answer is direct. The cause of death, he says, is suffocation from bronchoaspiration, choking, derived from the intake of alcohol and other substances. The autopsy performed by the Forensic Medical Service of Sinaloa supports this finding. The companion, who had been with her all night, provided information to investigators. Authorities rule out assassination. They rule out foul play. It is officially an overdose. But in Culiacan, official stories and complete stories are rarely the same thing. The mystery doesn't start after the official ruling. It starts in the hours immediately following her death, when Claudia's social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, are suddenly set to private or deactivated entirely. Not by family, not by the platform. Someone, somewhere, is scrubbing her public presence before the news even fully breaks. The questions pile up fast. The first story that circulates in Culiacan's informal information networks, the blogs, the Borderland Beat forums, the WhatsApp chains that carry narco news faster than any newspaper, is that the companion who was with Claudia that night was not just a friend. According to this version, he was an operator for Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, who at the time were in the middle of a brutal internal power struggle against El Mayo Zambada's faction of the Sinaloa cartel. In that reading, a woman connected to Los Antrax, historically loyal to El Mayo's camp, dying under ambiguous circumstances in the company of a Chapito operative, is not a coincidence. It is a conclusion. Then there is the assassination attempt that preceded her death by weeks. Reports had emerged in August 2019 that Claudia had narrowly escaped being killed, that gunmen had opened fire on a woman matching her description, killed her, and only realized afterward they had gotten the wrong target. Claudia survived. She said nothing publicly, and then, 6 weeks later, she was dead anyway, in private, with an unidentified man, in a gated island community in the most cartel-saturated city in Mexico. There was also the matter of what the bronchoaspiration finding actually means in practice. The official cause, choking on vomit or inhaled fluid, while unconscious from alcohol and drugs, is a real and documented way to die from overdose. It is also, and this is the part that Culiacan's streets could not let go of, one of the cleanest ways to make a murder look like an accident. You don't need a gun, you don't need a blade, you need someone unconscious and a few minutes alone. The state attorney general ruled it out. No investigation was opened, no charges were filed. The companion walked away having provided his statement. Her body was turned over to her family. She was buried south of Culiacan. Her social media accounts never came back. In death, Claudia Ochoa Felix became something she could never fully be in life, confirmed. When she was alive, she existed in a permanent state of official denial. She wasn't a cartel boss. She wasn't the leader of Los Antrax. She was just a woman from Culiacan with controversial Instagram posts and the bad luck of resembling a celebrity and knowing powerful men. Deny, deflect, survive, that was the operating mode. In death, the denial collapsed. Not because any investigation proved what she'd been doing, but because the outpouring of reaction made the performance of innocence irrelevant. The cartel world mourned her openly. Narcos social media lit up. Her photos circulated again, this time as tribute. The girl with the pink AK-47, the girl on the private jet, the girl who stared down the camera like she was the most untouchable person in any room she'd ever walked into. She became an icon overnight. Drake's name came up within hours of her death. Fans who had followed both of them on social media had been circulating claims for years that the Canadian rapper and the Empress of Antrax had been following each other, exchanging messages, that Drake, famous for his appreciation of certain types of power and beauty, had been drawn into Claudia's orbit. When she died, his name trended on Twitter alongside hers. He never confirmed it. He never denied it. The rumor lived in the space between those two silences, which is exactly where narco mythology lives. Then, the people around her started dying too. El Chino Antrax, the man who had founded Los Antrax, the man at the center of Claudia's story, had been released from U.S. federal prison to house arrest in March 2020. He had served 7 years. He had allegedly cooperated with U.S. law enforcement during his sentence, providing information on his former cartel associates. On May 9, 2020, less than 2 months after his release, his probation officer reported him missing from his residence. On May 15, 2020, he was found dead in Sinaloa, shot. His body wrapped in cloth, his head covered with a black plastic bag, found in an abandoned SUV on a dirt road east of Culiacan, the city where he had grown up, where he had built his empire, where he had been one of the most feared men alive. His sister was in the car with him. Her husband was in the car. All three had been abducted, tortured, and executed. He had come back to Sinaloa after cooperating with U.S. authorities, and the Sinaloa cartel had killed him for it. The two most central figures in Claudia's story were now both dead, both gone in 2019 and 2020, both inside the world that had made them famous. Here is what Claudia Ochoa Felix's story actually reveals, underneath all the glamour and the AK-47 photos and the Kim Kardashian comparisons. She existed at the intersection of two things the cartel world had never quite combined before: the traditional narco power structure, marriages into cartel families, loyalty networks, enforcement units, and the emerging reality of social media, where image became power in a new and different way. She didn't just live inside the narco world, she broadcast it. She turned it into content. She made Los Antrax globally famous in a way that no DEA press release and no drug war documentary had managed to do. Whether she was genuinely commanding operations or living in the glow of men who commanded them, or both simultaneously, as the most honest answer probably requires, she understood something about the moment she was living in that most of the men around her didn't. In 2014, followers were currency. Visibility was armor. Being the most famous person affiliated with the most feared hit squad in Mexico meant that disappearing, you had a cost. For a while, that calculus kept her alive. And then, at 32 years old, in a private home on an island in Culiacan, on a Saturday morning in September 2019, it didn't anymore. 3 children lost their mother. An icon lost her body. And Culiacan gained another ghost. The narco world is full of men whose stories end in burning vehicles and roadside ditches and military operations that make the news for a day and then get forgotten. Claudia Ochoa. Felix's story ends in a private bedroom, officially from alcohol and drugs, with questions nobody in authority was interested in pursuing. Which ending is more mysterious? The roadside ditch or the bedroom? The guns or the silence? In Culiacan, they already know the answer. Claudia Berenice Ochoa. Felix went from a nursing student in Culiacan to the most photographed woman in Mexican narco history. She began as a girl from a middle-class neighborhood who married into the wrong family. She ended as La Imperatriz, a legend, a ghost, and an unanswered question wrapped in designer clothes and armed with a gold-plated rifle. She never officially admitted to anything. She was never charged with anything. She was never officially confirmed as anything other than a social media personality with powerful friends and controversial photos. And yet the 2 men most central to her story, El Chino Antrax and the world he built, are both gone. The cartel that made her famous has fractured into a civil war. The life that looked untouchable from the outside turned out to have the same expiration date as every other life in that world. Claudia just made it look more beautiful on the way there. Subscribe to Inform Secreto to continue exploring the hidden stories behind power. Real stories told unfiltered. Because what you don't see also controls the world. See you soon. She drives a Mercedes. She wears a Rolex. She carries Louis Vuitton. And yet, El Chapo's oldest daughter, now turning 50, might be the saddest member of his entire family. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman has at least 16 children. Most of the world only knows a handful of them, the ones who run the Sinaloa cartel, the ones splashed across headlines for arrests, extraditions, and shootouts. But his eldest, almost nobody's heard of her. And that's exactly the point. I assure you, the real story here isn't about cartel violence or courtroom drama. It's about something quieter, and honestly, a lot more disturbing. It's about a woman who claims to be the firstborn daughter of one of the most powerful criminals alive, and who has spent 50 years trying to prove she even exists to her own family. But amidst 16 children, multiple wives, decades of secrecy, and a family empire built on blood and fear, this woman did something almost nobody else in El Chapo's orbit has done. She went public. With letters, with interviews, with her face uncovered, asking for one thing only, to be acknowledged. And that one decision changed her life forever. Just maybe not in the way she hoped. But before we get into how she's living now, in 2026 at 50 years old, I need you to first understand who El Chapo was before he became El Chapo, and how a woman named Rosa Isela Guzmán Ortiz entered the picture decades before anyone knew the name Sinaloa Cartel. 1957, Joaquín Archibaldo Guzmán Loera is born in La Tuna, a tiny village in the Badiraguato municipality of Sinaloa, Mexico. He's the son of a cattle rancher, and by most accounts grows up poor, in a region where opium poppy cultivation isn't the exception, it's the economy. Why did El Chapo enter the trafficking business in the first place, you ask? Well, understand that we need to first look at where he grew up, Badiraguato, in the heart of what's often called Mexico's Golden Triangle, a mountainous region spanning Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, where opium poppy and marijuana cultivation had been the primary economic activity for generations, long before El Chapo was even born. Now, while all this was going on, Guzm was still just a teenager learning that very same trade. And in Badiraguato in the 1960s and 70s, that's simply what survival always looked like. Mid-1970s, this is where it gets interesting. According to a Guardian investigation by journalist José Luis Montenegro, a young Joaquín Guzm, not yet El Chapo, not yet famous, not yet feared, allegedly had a relationship with a school teacher named Mara Luisa Ortiz. 1976. A daughter is born. Her name is Rosa Isela Guzmán Ortiz. Now listen closely, cuz what I'm going to say next brings everything together. At the time Rosa Isela was born, El Chapo was just 19 years old. He wasn't yet the man who'd build a multi-billion-dollar trafficking empire. He wasn't yet married to Alejandrina Mara Salazar Hernandez, which would happen the following year, in 1977. He wasn't yet the head of anything. He was just a teenager from a poor village, and if Rosa Isela's claims are true, he was already a father. But here's where things get interesting. Rosa Isela wouldn't become part of the public conversation around the Guzm family for 40 years. While El Chapo went on to marry at least 3 more times, Estela Pay, Griselda Ilpez Prez in the mid-1980s, and finally, Emma Coronel Ispuro in 2007. And while he fathered at least 15 children that the world does know about, Rosa Isela stayed almost completely invisible. This reality, along with El Chapo's eventual rise to becoming the most wanted man in the world, set the stage for what would become one of the strangest family disputes in modern criminal history. Now, while El Chapo was busy becoming a billionaire, building tunnels under prison walls, and escaping maximum security facilities not once but twice, Rosa Isela was, by her own account, growing up on the outside of all of it. Not poor, not unaware, but not acknowledged either. Based on specific records and reporting from this era, El Chapo's first escape came in 2001, when he reportedly walked out of Puente Grande prison hidden in a laundry cart, an event that instantly made him a folk legend across parts of Mexico. His second escape, in 2015, was even more dramatic, a mile-long tunnel dug directly beneath his cell at the Altiplano Federal Prison, complete with ventilation and lighting, ending at a half-built house outside the facility's perimeter. Both escapes dominated international headlines for weeks. Both turned El Chapo into a household name far beyond Mexico's borders. And during both of those moments, when the entire world was talking about her father, Rosa Isela, by her own account, was simply living her life. Not commenting. Not appearing in coverage. Not named in a single major outlet covering either escape. If she truly was his eldest child during the two biggest moments of his criminal career, she was, for all practical purposes, invisible during both of them. And that single fact, being the oldest child of one of the richest criminals alive, while simultaneously being treated as if she didn't exist, even during the moments that made him a global icon, is the foundation of everything that happens next. This is the year everything changes. Jose Luis Montenegro, the same journalist who'd later detail her story for The Guardian, publishes a piece introducing the world to Rosa Isela Guzmán, describing her as the unknown eldest daughter of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. We know El Chapo's family life was complicated. Multiple wives, multiple kids, multiple households. But this, Now this was different. This wasn't a son running cartel operations or a wife facing federal charges. This was a woman claiming, for the first time publicly, that she was the first child El Chapo ever had, and that she'd spent her entire life with almost no one outside her immediate circle believing her. May 5th, 2017, here's the moment that put her face on the record. Outside the federal courthouse in Brooklyn, New York, where El Chapo was about to stand trial on drug trafficking, money laundering, and firearms charges that could put him away for life, Rosa Isela Guzmán showed up. Standing beside attorney Jose Luis González Meza at a press conference, she was identified, on record, as the eldest of Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán's 16 children. But here's the part that might actually interest you. When Montenegro first profiled her, he described someone living a life of visible success. According to his reporting, Rosa Isela ran what he called a small chain of car washes, beauty salons, and cafes, and he said her businesses were doing very well, judging by, in his words, the Rolex on her wrist, the Louis Vuitton bag at her feet, and the Mercedes-Benz parked outside. So picture that for a second. A woman quietly running a small business empire across the US and Mexico, successful enough for designer accessories and a luxury car, and almost nobody outside her circle even knew she existed, let alone that she claimed to be the daughter of the most wanted man on earth. But ironically, and this is where the story takes its first real gut punch, when she actually showed up to support her father, in person, at his Brooklyn court date, no Rolex, no Louis Vuitton, no Mercedes in sight. The Daily Beast described her that day wearing pants that were too long, dragging through puddles on the courthouse sidewalk. You see this contrast, the woman with the watch and the handbag versus the woman in soaked, ill-fitting clothes outside a federal courthouse, isn't just a wardrobe story. It's the entire emotional core of who Rosa Isela appears to be, someone caught between two completely different lives, belonging fully to neither. Why did Rosa Isela go public at all, you ask? Well, it all boils down to one thing: recognition. According to her interviews with the Daily Beast, Rosa Isela claims to possess more than 15 letters exchanged between her and El Chapo over the years. Letters in which, she says, he refers to her directly as his daughter. That's more than just a courtesy, she told the Daily Beast, pushing back against Emma Coronel's explanation that any contact from El Chapo toward Rosa Isela had simply been a courtesy gesture, not an acknowledgement of paternity. Montenegro, the journalist who broke the original story, backed her up here. He told the Daily Beast that he had personally reviewed the letters, that they were signed by El Chapo, and that he believed them to be authentic. The Guardian, for its part, stood by its original reporting. But did any of that settle the dispute? Well, no. Instead, it only made things messier. Here's something no one actually talks about. When this story broke, it didn't just create a news cycle. It created a direct conflict between Rosa Isela and the recognized Guzman family. Emma Coronel, El Chapo's wife, the woman who married him in 2007 at just 18 years old when he was 50, said she'd never heard of Rosa Isela. According to reporting, Coronel said she'd even consulted with two of El Chapo's sisters, and they'd never heard of her either. If you take the time and do your homework on the Guzman family, you'll find that this kind of denial isn't unusual. El Chapo is documented as having children with multiple different women, some of whom never crossed paths with each other. The Daily Beast even raised the possibility that some of his children, what they called narco juniors, might be completely unknown to the rest of the family. So in theory, Rosa Isela's situation wasn't even that unusual. But Rosa Isela wasn't just claiming to be a daughter. She was claiming to be the oldest, the firstborn, among at least 16 children. And that's a much bigger claim to be denied on. So what did she do next? She offered to take a DNA test, publicly, to settle it once and for all. As of the reporting available, there's no indication that test ever happened, or that it resolved anything. Now here's where it gets genuinely heartbreaking, if you actually sit with it. Despite being denied by Emma Coronel and El Chapo's sisters, despite never being officially recognized, Rosa Isela has continued to describe herself not just as a sibling, but as a kind of guardian figure for the rest of the family. In her own words, to the Daily Beast, "We are all half-siblings. But in any case, we are siblings. The 16 of us. I'm the oldest. They are my little brothers and sisters, and I have to look out for them." Think about that. A woman who isn't even acknowledged by her father's wife, who's been told point blank that nobody in the family had heard of her, and her response isn't anger or revenge. It's responsibility. She's positioning herself as the protector of siblings, who by every official account don't even know she's related to them. She also claimed, according to reporting, to be close with El Chapo's mother, Consuelo Loera, and said she helped support her financially. That detail matters a lot more than it might seem, because of what happened next in the broader family timeline. Consuelo Loera, El Chapo's mother, lived a quiet life for most of her 90-plus years, but she became a brief national talking point in 2020, when then-President Andrés Manuel López Obrador shook her hand during a visit to Badiraguato, defending the gesture as simple courtesy toward what he called a respectable old lady. In a letter she wrote in March 2020, Loera said she was 92 years old, and she used that letter to push for her son to be returned to Mexico to serve his sentence, a request that obviously went nowhere. Loera passed away in her mid-90s, and her death was confirmed by multiple Mexican outlets, with reports describing her final weeks in a private clinic. Now here's the question this raises. If Rosa Isela truly was close to Consuelo Loera, and truly did help support her financially, as she claimed, was she there, in any capacity, when Loera died? Was she part of that family moment at all? Based on available reporting, there's no indication she was acknowledged in that process either. To put that into context, this is a 50-year-old woman who says she helped financially support her own grandmother, who claims to have a paper trail of letters proving her father called her daughter, and who still, by most accounts, remains on the outside of the family she says she belongs to. If you do the math, I'm sure you can tell. Rosa Isela was already 19 years old by the time her father married Emma Coronel in 2007. She was already an adult, already building whatever life she'd go on to build, while El Chapo was starting an entirely new chapter with an 18-year-old bride and, eventually, twin daughters. Think about the timeline here. By the time Rosa Isela was old enough to have her own children, El Chapo was fathering more kids with other women. Kids who would grow up inside the family structure, with the Guzum name attached to them from birth, with access to resources, protection, and at least some version of a relationship with their father. Rosa Isela, by contrast, was reportedly raised primarily by her mother, Mara Luisa Ortiz, the school teacher. Not the cartel, not the compound, not the armed guards or the safe houses that other Guzum children grew up around. A teacher's household, in a region where the Guzum name carried enormous weight, but where her branch of that name carried almost none. So while the rest of the world eventually came to know El Chapo as the most wanted man in the world, a title that came with its own twisted kind of fame for his recognized children, Rosa Isela grew up watching that fame from a distance, as someone with every reason to claim a piece of it, and apparently no path to actually do so. Significantly different compared to Rosa Isela's situation is how El Chapo's recognized children have lived. And this comparison is honestly where the sadness of her story gets put into full perspective. Take Alejandrina Giselle Guzum Salazar, one of El Chapo's officially acknowledged daughters, born in 1981, just 5 years after Rosa Isela. Unlike Rosa Isela, Alejandrina grew up inside the family structure. She went to school. She studied medicine. For most of her life, she stayed largely out of the spotlight until she made headlines of her own, including an arrest at the San Diego border crossing in 2014 for allegedly trying to enter the U.S. on someone else's passport, at which point she told authorities her father was Joaquin El Chapo Guzum. So even El Chapo's acknowledged children have had complicated, sometimes criminal entanglements with his legacy, but they at least have the legacy to begin with. Rosa Isela doesn't even get that. And then there's the next generation entirely. Frida Guzum Muoz, one of El Chapo's granddaughters, the daughter of his eldest acknowledged son, Degar Guzum Elpez, who was murdered by a rival cartel in 2008. Frida, born in 2005, has no links to crime herself, and at just 18 years old, she's been living a life of luxury travel, visiting Buckingham Palace, taking a boat ride on Loch Ness, going on a whiskey tasting in Edinburgh, and posing at the Palace of Versailles, the Louvre, and the Eiffel Tower, all while pursuing a music and influencer career to over 110,000 Instagram followers. Let that sink in. A teenage granddaughter of El Chapo, 2 generations removed, with no criminal involvement of her own, is living a globe-trotting influencer lifestyle, fully embraced by the family name. Meanwhile, the woman who claims to be El Chapo's actual firstborn child, now turning 50, is still fighting just to be acknowledged as part of the family at all. But here's the part that might actually interest you most. In recent years, Rosa Isela has built what's been described as a business empire under the name R. Guzum, selling merchandise tied directly to her father's legacy. Clothing, beauty products, and more, all branded around the Guzum name. Why did she build a brand around her father's name, you ask? Well, understand that we need to first go back to everything we just covered. She's spent decades trying to get this family and the world to recognize her connection to El Chapo. And in a strange, almost tragic way, building a commercial brand off that name is its own form of recognition seeking, even if the family that denies her existence has nothing to do with it, and arguably can't stop her from doing it. It's recognition by proxy. If the people won't claim her, maybe the name still can, at least commercially. To put that into another perspective, there's an entire global market of people fascinated by the Guzum name. T-shirts, hats, documentaries, true crime podcasts, YouTube channels just like the one telling you this story right now. El Chapo's name generates attention and money, whether the family wants it to or not. So in a sense, Rosa Isela isn't doing anything fundamentally different from what dozens of unrelated content creators and merchandisers already do every single day, except she's doing it as the person claiming to be his daughter, which gives the whole thing a strange double meaning. Is it a tribute, a business strategy, a quiet protest against being erased? Based on her public statements, it might honestly be all three at once. 2024. Amid escalating violence in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa, following the capture of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel, Rosa Isela did something almost nobody in her position would do. She made a public plea on social media directed at her half-brothers, the so-called Los Chapitos faction, led by Ivan, Alfredo, Joaquin, and Ovidio Guzm, urging them to stop their dangerous infighting within the cartel. We know cartel violence in Sinaloa has been ongoing for years, but this was different in its framing. This wasn't a cartel insider or a government official speaking out. This was a woman whose own paternity claim had been publicly denied by the family, stepping forward to call out misinformation and beg for an end to violence threatening innocent civilians in the city, where she says her family is from. Her message went viral on platforms like X and TikTok, and then it was deleted. To put into context just how complicated her position is, she's pleading with men who, according to the family's official position, aren't even her brothers. She's risking public exposure and possibly cartel attention for siblings who reportedly don't know she exists. And then the message just disappears. Now here's where the broader family story takes another dramatic turn, and it's worth understanding because it shows just how unstable and how transactional the Guzm family's situation has become. In 2025, Griselda Elpez Prez, one of El Chapo's ex-wives, along with 16 other relatives, crossed the U.S. southern border at the Tijuana/San Diego crossing as part of what reports described as a secret plea deal with U.S. federal authorities, reportedly connected to the case against El Chapo's youngest son, Ovidio Guzm Lopez, who'd been extradited to the U.S. in September 2023 after a massive raid that left 29 people dead. According to reporting, the family arrived carrying $70,000 in cash, and Mexico's Security Secretary, Omar Garca Harfuch, confirmed the move was tied to negotiations with the Department of Justice. 17 relatives. A secret deal with federal prosecutors. Suitcases of cash. A negotiated path into the United States. Rosa Isela was not one of them. If she truly is El Chapo's eldest child, and if the family's official structure is fluid enough to negotiate safe passage for 17 people in a plea deal, the fact that she remains entirely outside that structure tells you everything about where she actually stands, even now, even at 50. According to the available reporting, pieced together from The Guardian's original investigation, the Daily Beast's follow-up, court records from Brooklyn, and ongoing coverage of the broader Guzm family, Rosa Isela Guzm Ortiz, now turning 50, remains in roughly the same position she's occupied for the better part of a decade, publicly claiming to be El Chapo's eldest daughter, privately still fighting for any form of acknowledgement from the family that bears her father's name. Few developments have suggested any resolution. Some reporting mentions her continued business activity under the R. Guzm brand, suggesting she's found a way to monetize the connection regardless of whether the family accepts it. Others highlight her continued, occasional public statements, like the 2024 plea to her half-brothers, showing she hasn't given up trying to insert herself into the family's story, even from the outside. But even if her businesses are genuinely successful, even if the Rolex and the Louis Vuitton and the Mercedes are real, it had one undeniable, measurable impact on her life. At 50 years old, she is still introducing herself to the world as the daughter nobody will claim. The only question left to answer right now is, at 50, with El Chapo serving life plus 30 years at the ADEX Florence Supermax in Colorado, a place from which he will never walk free again, does it even matter anymore whether the family acknowledges her? You'd think, logically, that the answer would be no. He's never coming home. There's no inheritance to fight over in any traditional sense. Most of what's left of the Guzum Empire is either seized, sanctioned, or being fought over by half-brothers locked in their own violent power struggle. Recognition from this family doesn't unlock wealth, doesn't unlock safety, doesn't unlock anything tangible. And yet, by every account we have, Rosa Isela keeps trying. Other people in similar situations, and there are likely more unknown Guzum children out there, as even the Daily Beast acknowledged, have largely chosen to stay hidden. Silence is safer. Anonymity is safer. But Rosa Isela chose the opposite path. Letters, interviews, press conferences, na-test offers, public pleas to cartel-affiliated half-brothers. It's worth pausing here to ask what Rosa Isela is actually fighting for. Because it's not money, and it's not protection. At least not in any obvious sense. Based on her own statements, what she seems to want is something far simpler, and in some ways far harder to get. To be allowed to call her half-siblings brothers and sisters without that claim being publicly contradicted by the people closest to them. To have the letters, she says, prove her father called her daughter means something to the family, not just to journalists. To not have to keep explaining, at 50 years old, why she's standing outside a courthouse, or posting a video to siblings who don't know she exists, or building a clothing brand around a surname that legally and socially still isn't fully hers. Statistics show that public figures who spend decades pursuing recognition from estranged or denying family members, particularly in cases involving inheritance, paternity, or family identity, rarely receive a clean resolution. Most such cases either fade from public attention without a conclusion, get quietly settled through private legal arrangements never disclosed publicly, or simply continue indefinitely, with both sides repeating their original positions for years. Rosa Isela's situation, based on the available record, currently fits the third category. The conditions that created Rosa Isela's situation are deeply specific to the Guzum family's unique structure, and that's part of why her story doesn't really have a template to follow. First, El Chapo has at least 4 documented marriages and at least 16 children across those relationships and others, meaning the family itself has no single, unified official record to check her claim against. Second, the family's own positions have shifted depending on who's speaking. Emma Coronel denies knowing her. El Chapo's sisters reportedly hadn't heard of her, but El Chapo himself, if the letters are real, apparently called her daughter directly, in writing, for years. Third, the Guzum family's structure is currently in active chaos, with Los Chapitos in open conflict, with Ovidio in U.S. custody, with 17 relatives crossing the border under a federal plea deal, and with El Chapo's mother now deceased. There's no stable family left for Rosa Isela to be formally accepted into, even if everyone suddenly agreed she belonged. If anyone else tried to replicate Rosa Isela's approach, going public, demanding recognition from a cartel family in active internal conflict, they're more likely to end up in danger than in acceptance. Her relative safety, if you can call it that, may come from operating in legitimate businesses across 2 countries, maintaining a public profile that makes her disappearance more noticeable, and, frankly, from simply not being seen as a threat to anyone's power or money. And here's something no one actually talks about. While El Chapo's empire was built on fear and billions of dollars, the human cost of that empire isn't just measured in violence or prison sentences. It's also measured in things like this: a woman turning 50, by most accounts financially comfortable, even successful, who has spent her entire adult life trying to prove she belongs to a family that has spent that same time insisting she doesn't. In fact, the contradictions never resolved. The letters were never publicly verified beyond one journalist's review. The DNA test never happened as far as we know. The family never issued any kind of acknowledgement, and the half-brothers she begged for peace never responded, at least not publicly. So is Rosa Isela Guzman Ortiz really El Chapo's oldest daughter? Based on everything we've covered, the letters, the court appearance, the journalist's verification, her own consistent claims over nearly a decade, there's a real case that she is. But whether she is or isn't almost doesn't matter anymore. Because either way, at 50 years old, she's living proof that even being connected by blood, by letters, by a name, to one of the most powerful men in the world doesn't guarantee you a place in his family. Compare that one more time to the rest of the family's trajectory in just the last couple of years. Frida Guzman Muoz, 18, touring European capitals and building an Instagram following past 110,000. 17 relatives, including an ex-wife, crossing the U.S. border as part of a negotiated federal deal, reportedly with $70,000 in cash. Los Chapitos, locked in a violent internal war for control of what's left of the cartel. An entire extended family, still very much active, still very much visible, still very much operating as a unit, even a fractured, dangerous one. And then there's Rosa Isela, not part of the plea deal, not part of the cartel conflict, not part of the European vacations, just a 50-year-old businesswoman with a Rolex, a Mercedes, and a brand bearing her father's name, standing, as she has for nearly a decade now, just outside the frame of every photo. El Chapo's gone for good, locked away for the rest of his life in a cell roughly the size of a small bathroom, allowed out for 1 hour a day, with no realistic chance of ever seeing any of his children again in person. But we don't think Rosa Isela's story is done being written. Whether she ever gets the recognition she's spent decades seeking, or whether she spends the next chapter of her life exactly where she spent the last 50 years, on the outside, looking in, that's still an open question. And honestly, that might be the saddest part of this entire story. Not the cartel violence, not the prison sentences, not even the billions of dollars, most of which are gone or seized anyway. Just one woman, turning 50, still waiting for a family that has never once, on the record, said her name back. If there's one final thought worth leaving you with, it's this. Somewhere in Mexico or the United States right now, a 50-year-old woman is running her businesses, wearing her watch, driving her car, posting under a brand that carries her father's name. From the outside, by almost every visible measure, her life looks fine, successful even. But based on everything she's said publicly for nearly a decade, what she actually wants has nothing to do with any of that. And as far as the record shows, she still doesn't have it.
Over to North America, where the Mexican Navy has said at least 11 suspected criminals were killed in northern Mexico.
On March 19, 2026, the Mexican Navy killed 11 cartel gunmen and arrested the daughter of one of the most powerful drug lords in history. They loaded her onto a military helicopter in full combat fatigues, flew her away from her luxurious ranch in Culiacan, and then let her go a few hours later. No charges, no explanation, just walked free.
The most powerful is the Sinaloa cartel. Almost the 70% of the world is infected by this cartel.
The daughter of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a man who ran the Sinaloa cartel for over 30 years, without ever being caught, was released after an operation that left bodies on the ground and a whole country asking the same question. How much did she pay to walk out? Rumors are saying $10 million cash to the Mexican government to make the whole thing disappear.
But each side's primary enemy remains the other. And in this war, the dynamics have changed.
Let me break down the criminal life of Monica Zambada Niebla and how she just pulled off one of the biggest bribes in Mexican history. Monica Zambada Niebla was the daughter of El Mayo Zambada, co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the richest, most powerful drug traffickers the world has ever seen. But unlike her brothers who got arrested, extradited, and locked up in US prisons, Monica operated different. She wasn't out there moving bricks or shooting at rivals. She was the money, the cleaner, the one who made billions of dollars in drug proceeds look legitimate. The United States Treasury Department designated her as a key money launderer back in 2007. They said she ran front companies. They said she was part of the financial network that kept the Sinaloa cartel running. But in Mexico, no charges, no warrants, no problem, until March 19th, when the Mexican military raided her property, killed 11 of her security team, arrested her in front of cameras, and then acted like it never happened. To understand how Monica Zambada got to this point, where she can allegedly bribe her way out of a military arrest, we gotta go back to where she came from. Let's rewind to March 2nd, 1980. Monica del Rosario Zambada Niebla was born in Culiacan, Sinaloa, the birthplace of the Sinaloa cartel and the heart of Mexico's drug trafficking empire. Her father, Ismael Zambada Garcia, was already deep in the game by then. He wasn't El Mayo yet. That name would come later. But he was building. Monica's mother was Rosario Niebla Cardosa, known as Chayito. According to journalist Annabel Hernandez, Chayito wasn't just some cartel wife. She was connected. Her brother-in-law was involved in drug trafficking. And it was through that family connection that El Mayo got his start, his first drug harvest. Chayito met El Mayo when they were teenagers at a butcher shop where he worked. They got married when he was 17 and she was 19. Religious ceremony first in Costa Rica, Sinaloa. Then they made it official in El Dorado. From that union came 5 children, and all their names start with M. That wasn't a coincidence. That was branding. The Zambada family did everything intentional. The kids were Maria Teresa Zambada Niebla Midiam, Patricia Zambada Niebla, Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, known as El Vicentillo, Mónica del Rosario Zambada Niebla, Modesta Zambada Niebla. Mónica was right in the middle, not the oldest, not the youngest. But from jump, she was being raised in a world where the family business was drug trafficking. Now, here's the thing about growing up as El Mayo's daughter in Culiacan during the 1980s and 90s. Your father wasn't just some street dealer. By the time Monica was a teenager, El Mayo was co-lead in the Sinaloa cartel alongside Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. They were moving tons of cocaine from Colombia through Mexico into the United States. They had politicians on payroll. They had entire police departments working for them. They had an empire. And Monica, she wasn't sheltered from it. The whole family was in. The U.S. Treasury Department later confirmed that El Mayo's wife Rosario and all 4 daughters, Maria Teresa, Miriam Patricia, Monica, and Modesta, were participants in the criminal enterprise. Not just aware of it, participants. But Monica's path was different from her brother Vicente's. While El Mayo was building one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, Monica was getting an education. She enrolled at the Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa, the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, and studied business administration. On paper, she was a college student. In reality, she was learning how to run the financial side of a multi-billion-dollar drug empire. Think about it, business administration. That's accounting, finance, corporate structures, supply chain management. All the skills you need to launder money, set up shell companies, and move drug proceeds through legitimate businesses without getting caught. And that's exactly what she did. In May 2007, the United States Department of the Treasury dropped a whole organizational chart. They called it the Zambada Garcia Financial Network. And Monica's name was right there on it. The Treasury Department designated 6 companies as fronts for El Mayo's money laundering operations. And behind those companies, El Mayo's family, specifically Rosario Niebla Cardoza, his wife. All 4 daughters, Maria Teresa, Miriam Patricia, Monica, and Modesta. The main company they identified was Nueva Industria de Ganaderos de Culiacán, SIDCV, New Livestock Industry of Culiacán. It also operated under the name Lecheria Santa Monica Dairy. This wasn't some small operation. The dairy had branches in 4 different Mexican states. Another company was Gasolinera Rosario, a gas station network registered under Rosario Niebla Cardoza's name. On the surface, these looked like legitimate businesses: a dairy, a gas station chain, normal companies doing normal business. But according to the US government, they were being used to wash hundreds of millions of dollars in drug money. Here's how money laundering works in the cartel world. You can't just deposit $10 million in cash at a bank without red flags going up. So you gotta make that dirty money look clean. You buy legitimate businesses, restaurants, gas stations, dairies, construction companies. Then you mix the drug money with the real revenue from those businesses. Suddenly, your cocaine money looks like it came from selling milk or gas. You pay taxes on it, you report it to the government, and boom, it's clean. Monica's role, according to US intelligence, was to act as a front person. She'd own the companies on paper. She'd manage the operations. She'd handle the finances. And in doing so, she'd launder massive amounts of drug proceeds for her father's cartel. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, put Monica on the specially designated nationals list. That's the US government's way of saying, this person is helping drug traffickers. We're sanctioning her. American citizens can't do business with her. Her assets in the US are frozen. But here's the crazy part. While the United States was designating Monica as a money launderer and sanctioning her companies, Mexico did nothing. No charges, no investigation, no arrest warrant. She kept living in Culiacán, kept running her businesses, kept operating like everything was normal. Why? Because in Sinaloa, the Zambada family wasn't just powerful. They were untouchable. For decades, the Zambada family ran the Sinaloa cartel without major consequences. El Mayo never got arrested, never got caught. He was a ghost, running one of the biggest drug trafficking organizations in the world from the mountains of Sinaloa, while the DEA and Mexican authorities chased shadows. But slowly, the empire started cracking. March 18, 2009, Monica's brother, Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Vicentillo, got arrested in Mexico City.
El Vicentillo con 5 individuos más que fungían como su escolta personal.
They found him in a mansion on Calle Lluvia, 269 in the Lomas del Pedregal neighborhood. He was a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel, overseeing operations and logistics. El Vicentillo got extradited to the United States, and here's where it gets wild. He flipped. He became a cooperating witness for the U.S. government. In 2019, he testified against Joaquin El Chapo Guzman during El Chapo's trial in Brooklyn. His testimony was critical in getting El Chapo convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For cooperating, El Vicentillo got a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of life. He's expected to be released soon and will probably enter witness protection. So Monica's brother snitched on her father's partner. That's the level of dysfunction we talking about. But El Vicentillo wasn't the only Zambada kid who got caught up. Monica had half-brothers too. El Mayo had kids with multiple women. One of them was Ismael Zambada Imperial, known as Mayito Gordo. He got arrested in November 2014 in Mexico. Another half-brother, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, known as El Serra, also got arrested and eventually released. And then there's Ismael Zambada Siqueiros, Mayito Flaco, El Mayo's son from another woman. He's currently the leader of La Maíza faction of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the most wanted men in Mexico. But through all of this, all the arrests, all the snitching, all the chaos, Monica stayed clean. No arrests, no charges. She kept operating in the shadows, managing the money side of things while her brothers and half-brothers got locked up or killed. Then came July 25th, 2024. The day everything changed. July 25th, 2024. Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons, flew into El Paso, Texas on a private plane. Both got arrested by U.S. authorities. But here's the twist. El Mayo didn't surrender willingly. He got kidnapped by Joaquin Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's son.
The largest, most violent, and most prolific fentanyl trafficking operation.
According to El Mayo's own testimony, Joaquin lured him to a meeting under false pretenses, said they were going to discuss a property deal and resolve some issues with politicians. When El Mayo showed up, he got ambushed. Joaquin's men rushed through a window they'd removed the glass from, threw El Mayo down, put a bag over his head, zip-tied him, drugged him with sedatives, and flew him across the border to American authorities. Joaquin did this hopping for leniency for himself and his brothers. He wanted a plea deal, and he got one. In December 2025, he pleaded guilty and agreed to forfeit $80 million. But the consequences of that betrayal? A full-scale civil war in Sinaloa. September 9th, 2024. The war officially started. Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, versus La Maíza, El Mayo's faction led by his son Mayito Flaco. From September 2024 to March 2025, the death toll was insane. 1,972 homicides, 2,077 plus forced disappearances, 5.4 murders per day, 14,000 federal troops deployed to Culiacan, 10,000 jobs, lost 50,000 people protesting the violence. Los Chapitos started losing badly. Mayito Flaco, allied with Chapo Isidro, another powerful cartel boss who hated the Guzman family. Together, they took over 90% of Los Chapitos' territory. Key leaders got arrested. Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzman, the top Chapitos leaders, reportedly fled Sinaloa entirely. And through all this chaos, where was Monica? She was in Culiacan, in the heart of La Maíza territory, protected by her half-brother Mayito Flaco's organization. Living on a luxurious ranch in El Alamo, a suburb of Culiacan known for cartel-owned properties. March 19, 2026. Around 3 a.m. Mexican Navy forces, backed by the Secretariat of Security and Citizen Protection, launched coordinated raids across rural areas surrounding Culiacan. The target? La Maíza faction properties. The main target was allegedly Joel Enrique S., also known as L-19, a lieutenant in Mayito Flaco's structure. But when federal forces moved in on a luxurious ranch house in El Alamo, they found something else, or rather, someone else. Monica Zambada Niebla, El Mayo's daughter, wearing military-style fatigues. Also present, her husband, name not publicly disclosed, and their young daughter, El Mayo's granddaughter. The moment the military identified the property as connected to the Zambada family, all hell broke loose. La Maíza gunmen opened fire on the federal forces. A massive shootout erupted. Automatic weapons, heavy firepower. This wasn't a quick raid, this was a battle. When the smoke cleared, 11 La Maíza sicarios were dead. Monica Zambada Niebla was in custody. Her husband was in custody. Their daughter was in protective custody. Another cartel member, Omar Oswaldo Torres Cabada, alias El Patas, was arrested in the nearby town of Valle Escondido. The Mexican Navy established a security perimeter around the entire area. They blocked off roads leading to El Salado and El Alamo. No one in, no one out. Photos and videos started leaking on social media. Monica being loaded onto a Navy helicopter. Military personnel surrounding her. The bodies of dead sicarios on the ground. Burned out vehicles. Shell casings everywhere. This was a major operation. The kind you see when the government is serious about taking down high-value targets. And for a few hours, it looked like the Mexican government had finally decided to go after the Zambada family's financial network. Then, just as quickly as it started, it ended. Within hours of her arrest, Monica Zambada Niebla was released. No charges filed. No investigation announced. The Security Cabinet of Mexico issued a statement that read, "During this operation, a woman, identified as the daughter of a criminal leader, was also located. She has no connection to criminal activities nor any outstanding warrants against her, and was therefore released and handed over to her family in accordance with established protocols and in strict adherence to the law." Let that sink in. They raided her property. They killed 11 gunmen who were protecting her. They arrested her in military fatigues on a ranch owned by a cartel faction. And then they said she has no connection to criminal activities. Security Secretary Omar Garcia Harfuch doubled down. He said, "In the past 20 years, no arrest warrant has been obtained in either the United States or Mexico against this person. It is an administrative process in which individuals are designated for suspicious or illicit operations." But here's the problem with that statement. The U.S. Treasury Department's OFAC designation from 2007 is still active. Monica Zambada Niebla is still on the specially designated nationals list. The sanctions against her, her mother, and her 3 sisters are still in effect. The U.S. government still identifies her as a money launderer for the Sinaloa cartel. Mexican security officials tried to claim the OFAC designation was lifted in 2019. But when reporters checked with the U.S. government, they found that wasn't true. The EFE news agency confirmed the sanctions are still active, so the Mexican government was lying. Security analyst David Saucedo told Infobay Mexico, "It is true that in Mexico there is no criminal case as such. There are no charges against her. But in the United States, there are." She appears in the Office of Foreign Assets Control. They published some time ago an organizational chart where she appears as a front person and as part of the financial structure used for money laundering. El Universal columnist Alberto Capella went even harder. He called the government's explanation weak and incomplete. He asked why, if Monica has no connection to criminal activities, the Mexican Navy launched a massive military operation directly targeting her family's property. Why kill 11 people to arrest someone who's supposedly innocent? Capella also suggested that the arrest might not have been approved by the U.S. government. He speculated it could endanger the plea deal negotiations with El Mayo, who's currently in federal custody in Brooklyn awaiting trial. But the question everyone was asking is simpler. How much did she pay? Almost immediately after Monica's release, rumors started spreading on social media and in Mexican news outlets. $10 million. That's the number being reported. $10 million in cash, allegedly paid to members of the Mexican Navy to secure her release. Now, these are unconfirmed reports. There's no paper trail. No one from the government is going to admit to taking a bribe. But in Mexico, especially when it comes to cartel-related arrests, this kind of thing isn't rare. It's how the system works. Let me put this in perspective. El Mayo Zambada, at the time of his arrest, was estimated to be worth somewhere between $500 million and $3 billion. That's from decades of moving cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States. He's been in the game since the 1970s. He co-led the Sinaloa cartel, the richest, most powerful drug trafficking organization in history. Monica is his daughter. She managed the financial side, she ran the front companies, she laundered the money. You think she doesn't have access to tens of millions of dollars in cash? $10 million to walk away from a federal arrest, where 11 of your security team just got killed, is nothing. That's the cost of doing business. And the Mexican Navy? They've been accused of corruption for decades, taking bribes from cartels, letting high-value targets escape, turning a blind eye to drug shipments. This wouldn't be new. Social media accounts started posting that the whole operation was a show, that the arrest was staged so the government could justify releasing her later, that the military went in knowing they'd let her go. But they needed the spectacle of the raid to make it look legitimate. One Twitter account with ties to cartel reporting said, "The bribe of the year, Monica Zambada, daughter of El Mayo Zambada, released after her detention." Reports of a multi-million-dollar bribe exceeding $10 million paid to members of the Navy to secure her release. So far, there is no clear position from the authorities, which keeps the case shrouded in uncertainty. The account continued. What is clear, however, is the incompetence of the authorities in the face of a high-level action like this, in which they are easily bribed, making a fool of the entire country. And here's the thing, nobody in Mexico was surprised. So where does this leave Monica Zambada Niebla? As of right now, she's a free woman, back with her family, back in Culiacan, protected by La Maiza. and apparently untouchable by Mexican law enforcement. El Patas, Omar Oswaldo Torres Cabada, the guy arrested with her, he's still in custody. He's a cartel lieutenant, so they're keeping him locked up. But Monica, she walked. The Mexican government is hoping this story goes away. They're hoping people forget about the 11 dead sicarios, the military raid, the leaked videos, and the fact that they arrested and released one of the most wanted money launderers in the cartel world. But the United States government is watching. El Mayo is currently in federal custody in Brooklyn. He's cooperating to some degree. They got him to plead guilty to 2 counts in August 2025. But if the US finds out that Mexico arrested his daughter and then let her go for a bribe, that's gonna complicate things. There's also the question of whether Monica's arrest was connected to El Mayo's plea deal. Some analysts think the US might have pushed Mexico to go after Monica as leverage against El Mayo, force him to cooperate more by threatening his family. But if that's true and Mexico let her go anyway, that's a huge betrayal of US-Mexico cooperation on cartel cases. And then there's the civil war still raging in Sinaloa. La Mayiza versus Los Chapitos. Monica's half-brother, Mayito Flaco, is winning that war right now. He controls most of the state. He has Chapo Isidro as an ally, and he's not gonna let anything happen to his sister. So even if the US wanted to extradite Monica, even if Mexico suddenly decided to charge her, La Mayiza would protect her with force. The reality is, Monica Zambada Niebla is probably going to stay free. She's going to keep managing the money. She's going to keep laundering drug proceeds. She's going to keep operating in the shadows just like she's been doing for the past 20 years. Because in Sinaloa, if you got enough money and enough firepower, the law don't apply to you. Monica Zambada Niebla's story is a perfect example of how the cartel system works in Mexico. It's not just about violence. It's not just about drugs. It's about money, power, and corruption at the highest levels of government. El Mayo built an empire that lasted over 30 years without him ever getting arrested. How? Because he paid off everyone. Politicians, police, military, judges. He made it so expensive to go after him that it wasn't worth it. And Monica learned from the best. She didn't run around with guns. She didn't post on social media. She didn't draw attention to herself. She just managed the money, kept her head down, and made sure everyone who needed to get paid got paid. The March 19th raid was supposed to be different. It was supposed to show that Mexico was serious about going after the Zambada family, even with El Mayo in US custody. But instead, it showed the opposite. It showed that even when 11 people die in a firefight, even when the whole world is watching, the Zambada family can still buy their way out. $10 million. That's the price of freedom for a cartel princess. And the Mexican government took it. This story matters because it shows why the war on drugs in Mexico is never going to be won. You can arrest all the sicarios you want. You can kill all the gunmen. But if the people at the top, the money launderers, the financial operators, the ones who make the whole system work, can just pay their way out, nothing changes. El Mayo's in prison. El Chapo's in prison, but their kids, their wives, their daughters, they still operating. They still moving money. They still running the show. Monica Zambada Niebla walked free on March 19th, 2026. And she's gonna keep walking free because in Mexico, money talks louder than justice. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Was this a bribe, or is there something else going on? and subscribe if you want more deep dives into cartel stories that don't get told.